FBI detective, this video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51 TLR Drugs. Please read on. The sensitive potion is actually a torture potion. For those who drink this potion, all the senses of the body will be amplified. For example, when the macute brush touched Lydia's neck skin, it was originally just a little itchy, but this time it was so itchy that Lydia doubted her life. Luo An pinched her arm slightly, and the feeling of slight pain turned into severe pain, as if her arm was suddenly broken. When the macute brush went all the way down, Lydia now looked at Luo An's profile, her eyes full of horror. Picking up the wine glass and pouring a glass of wine for Lydia, Luo An slowly fed her and signaled her not to drink too fast, then tilted his head and asked, "How about it? Do you want to continue?" No, Lydia, who was dry-mouthed and hoarse, shook her head repeatedly, her eyes red and her face full of pleading. "Then tell me." Throwing the macute brush that turned from white to yellow aside, Luo An took out a new macute brush, picked up the signature pen from the ground, and asked, "What exactly is this thing? What are its ingredients?" Looking at the signature pen and macute brush in front of her, Lydia wanted to cry, but had no tears. She overestimated herself and underestimated the torture that Luo An talked about. It is true that women are made of water, but they do not produce water by themselves. If it runs out, they need to be replenished from the outside. Facts have proved that everything should be done in moderation. Too much is as bad as too little. This is the wisdom of the ancient Eastern people. Taking a deep breath, Lydia controlled her shaking limbs to change her posture and explained to Luo An in a trembling voice, "I don't know the full name of the potion and the signature pen. I only know that people in the NSA have always called it TLR potion. Its ingredients are a mixture of the essence of hallucinogens, white flour, tranquilizers and other drugs." Hearing this, Luo An's heart sank, but his expression did not change. He continued to ask, "What is its function?" "To control others." Since she had already spoken, there was no need to continue hiding it, especially when Luo An shook the macute brush in his hand. Lydia's body also shook subconsciously. After hearing Luo An's question, Lydia said without hesitation, "After taking this potion, the target person will fall into hallucinations for a period of time. The NSA will keep repeating some words to the target person during the hallucination time. After taking the drug many times and entering hallucinations, the target person will remember the words said by the NSA personnel in his subconscious mind, and then at a critical moment, the target person will do something that meets the expectations of the NSA. In addition, the extract essence of the white flour in it will be processed by the NSA. After the first time, the person who takes this potion will develop an addiction that he will never be able to quit in this life. When the target person is addicted to it and feels uncomfortable next time, he will subconsciously look for the person who makes him hallucinate. So after I take this potion, I will be controlled by you for the rest of my life. Once I feel uncomfortable, I will subconsciously come to you for comfort. After that, my body will become more and more uncomfortable, and I will come to you for comfort more and more times, and I will fall into a vicious circle. At a certain critical moment, I will subconsciously do what you hypnotized me to do, right?" Luo An nodded. He understood what Lydia said and thought of some things the old killer said to him in his previous life. In the 1950s and 1960s, around 1950 to 1960, the CIA conducted a notorious MK Ultra program, which was about studying how to use drugs to control others. During this period, the CIA conducted more than 100 mind control experiments, and countless people died. Later, with the resignation of a certain president, the program was also stopped openly. The reason why it is said to be openly is that the department conducting the experiment is the CIA, and everyone knows what kind of people they are. The NSA and the CIA are closely connected, so it is normal for them to get some drugs. The L in the TLR drug is likely to represent the hallucinogen LSD, whose scientific name is lysergic diethylamide. When mixed with other drugs, it can cause people to become mentally confused and lose their intelligence. Although Luo An doesn't know what the remaining T and R are, they are definitely not good things. Can you let me go, Roan? I was wrong. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Seeing Roan lower his head and remain silent after hearing what she said, Lydia whispered, but don't worry. When I first met you last night, I didn't know you were Mona Evans' teammate, so I didn't use TLR on you. It wasn't until I woke up this afternoon and watched the news replay that I realized your identity, so I decided to use TLR on you temporarily, but you still saw through it. Huh. Roan was stunned when he heard Lydia's words. She didn't use TLR on him yesterday, so why did his waist hurt so much after getting up? Is it really because of lack of physical exercise? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. When it comes to dignity, men's mouths are harder than diamonds. Roan Greenwood did play games with women before, but since he became a new trainee agent of the FBI, he has not interacted with women for more than 2 months. Every day he sits in the office, and his exercise is just a few push-ups occasionally. Luo An was silent for a moment, then changed the subject, and said with a smile, "One last question, Lydia. I'll let you go after you answer it." Lydia nodded, and then Luo An's question made her face freeze instantly. "How did your previous husband die?" Seeing Lydia lower her head and remain silent, Luo An smiled and shook the macute brush in his hand. Feeling that her body had subconsciously moved towards the other's macute brush, Lydia was very sad and angry. She hated Luo An only a little, but she hated herself more for being stubborn just now. Why was she stubborn? Luo An had clearly told her before that she would answer his questions after drinking, but Lydia started to poo herself when she was tortured. "I can answer this question for you." After a long silence, Lydia finally chose to answer Luo An's question, but before that she made her own request. "I want to apply for witness protection from the FBI. Otherwise, even if you torture me to death, I will not say this." Luo An's face sank slightly, and he realized that there was something unusual behind this matter. As for what Lydia said later about torturing her to death, Luo An didn't believe it at all. Because when Lydia said this, her body kept rubbing against the macute brush, and she didn't look like she was afraid of being tortured. "Lydia." After a moment of silence, Luo An nodded and agreed to Lydia's request, but didn't let her speak immediately, but once again searched every corner of the room. "What are you looking for?" Lydia was a little confused. "See if there are any toys in the room that can monitor you." Luo An didn't find any monitoring devices when he searched the room for information about Lydia's identity. But it's better to be careful, and it won't take much effort to search once more. It's always good to be careful. After a while, Luo An finished searching again, and didn't find any monitoring devices. Lydia was relieved to see this. "Okay, you can talk now." Luo An sat back on the bed, and saw that Lydia's lips were a little chapped, so he poured her another glass of wine. "Thank you." Lydia, whose limbs were still tied, thanked her and took a sip of wine. She sighed subconsciously when she saw the macute brush thrown on the ground. After reacting, Lydia hurriedly shook her head, threw the strange thoughts in her heart aside, and said solemnly, "This is a plan secretly carried out by a senior NSA official without the knowledge of the FBI. Thanks to Juan, waiting for UCB, half-size vest, Chenjierenyu, a smile and pass 483, old bookworm, demon neighbor, 7 hell, Tangman Black Hand, Little Berserker, Tiger 03, female second only designated husband, Chuling Mu and other book friends for their recommendation votes. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 52, Large Scale Fairy Trap, please recommend. Please collect. Seeing the doubt on Roan's face, Lydia asked, "Do you know how many fugitives from other countries the federal government takes in every year?" Roan really didn't know this. Whether in this life or the previous life, he had never paid attention to this information. Lydia didn't expect Roan to answer, but continued to explain to herself. Since 30 years ago, the number of fugitives from other countries entering the federal territory through legal or illegal means has increased exponentially every year. The NSA doesn't care about ordinary murderers. They are concerned about those political fugitives who enter the federal government with a large amount of their own money, which is converted into US dollars. Hearing this, Roan's face showed a look of sudden realization. He guessed something and asked, "You just kill these political prisoners and get money from them?" "No, it's not that simple." Lydia rolled her eyes at Roan when she heard this. If the NSA's senior executive's methods were so crude, he would have been discovered by the FBI long ago, and the NSA would not let him go. "When my father just died, there was a large inheritance tax to pay, and I couldn't take it out at the time." Lydia's voice was a little dull when she mentioned her father. "Just when I was at a loss, the NSA people came to me. They said that, as long as I completed one of their tasks, I could get a large sum of money, which was enough for me to pay the damn inheritance tax. Did you agree?" "Yes, I agreed to the person in charge of the NSA who contacted me without hesitation." Lydia's face was not good. The chain of bars left to her by her father after his death, as well as her beautiful face, seemed to have become a death warrant during that period of time. Many people stared at her covetously. "After I agreed, the person in charge of the NSA contacted me and gave me a folder of information about a man, telling me that I must marry him within a year. This man was my first husband when I got married at the age of 22. And his father was a political fugitive who sneaked into the federal government from Western Europe with a lot of money a few years ago. A year ago, the political prisoner died of natural causes." Hearing this, Luo An suddenly realized. Most political prisoners from other countries who escaped to the federal government were registered with the FBI, but if they did not commit crimes in the country, the FBI would not bother to catch them on weekdays. A senior NSA official was eyeing these political fugitives who sneaked into the federal government. To be precise, he was eyeing the money of these fugitives. It was not appropriate to kill these political fugitives directly. The NSA officials wanted to secretly take the money for themselves and did not want to share it with the FBI, let alone attract the attention of the FBI. So they set their sights on the next generation of those political fugitives. The FBI is more concerned about the political fugitives themselves and has no interest in their next generation. The FBI will not pay too much attention to the family affairs of inheritance snatching. This gave the NSA officials an opportunity. What happened next was very logical. Find a girl to marry the next generation of political fugitives. Find a way to figure out the property composition of their family, various passwords, company contracts, etc. and then kill the second generation. After the second generation died, the girl left the family and pretended to leave some money to the second generation relatives before leaving to erase the reputation of marrying for money. Based on the intelligence from the girl, the top NSA officials sent people to suppress the second generation's companies and investments and seize them by trickery. During the whole process, the second generation's marriage was a normal behavior, and the FBI would not pay attention to it, let alone investigate the identity of the wife. Some family members did not find anything wrong during the whole process, and even lamented that the girl did not take advantage of the situation to ask for a share of the inheritance and was a good girl. Some family members found something wrong and suspected the girl, but they could not find any evidence at all, and the top NSA officials would send people to erase all traces. In addition, according to Lydia, the cause of her husband's death was a new type of drug developed by the CIA in India with materials and specialties from South Asia, which could not be detected by forensic doctors at all. In this way, a large-scale honey trap led by the NSA continued to be staged in various states of the Federation. Over the years, it is not that there were no FBI agents who found problems, but the FBI had no evidence, and the NSA was still checking for omissions, so this matter has not been clearly exposed until now. Good guy, Luo An called out, after listening to Lydia's narration. So, the rumors that you own fewer and fewer bars are false, right? Luo An's mouth twitched. Lydia got enough money to pay the inheritance tax after one marriage, so what about the other 3 times? How much money did she get? In addition, Lydia, a grassroots salesperson, is so rich. The NSA executives can't help but get angrier and angrier. I did sell the chain bars my father left me. This is true. Hearing Luo An's question, Lydia shrugged and said calmly, I just used all the money to buy a building. 1/3 of the 22-story building where the Flame Queen bar is located is mine. Luo An, are you short of male employees in this industry? Shaking his head and kicking the idea into the trash can, Luo An asked seriously, aren't you afraid that the top NSA executives will kill you girls to hide this matter? At first, I wasn't afraid, because the NSA contact who contacted me first, Daisy, was a woman who specialized in this kind of mission in the previous generation, and she lived a good life. After Daisy got too old to continue this kind of mission, she changed her job to become a contact person and was responsible for contacting us. At the same time, Daisy brainwashed us, saying that those political prisoners were sinners in their country. They deceived the people of their own country, abused their power for personal gain, and made a lot of money. It was a just act for us to take money from their descendants. At this point, Lydia's expression changed, and she looked at Luo An very solemnly, but after I completed the mission last time, Daisy disappeared completely, and I couldn't contact her anyway. The new contact said that Daisy left the Federation and went to South America, but hearing this, Luo An curled the corners of his mouth with a sneer. It is very likely that she left the Federation, but it is hard to say whether she will go to South America or heaven. I need your help, Roan. Seeing the expression on Roan's face, Lydia's eyes sparkled. She quickly squeezed next to him and rubbed against him, saying in a very sincere tone, I'm telling the truth. I really don't want to die. I can become a tainted witness for the FBI. I can tell you anything you ask. Okay, Lydia. Ignoring the tempting body beside him, Roan sat up from the bed and walked to the clothes rack. When he was looking for clothes, he accidentally found a pair of handcuffs. After 2 seconds of silence, Roan turned around and tore the stockings that bound Lydia's hands, and then replaced them with handcuffs, and then took out his mobile phone and called Lassie. Hello. You play games very fast, Luo An. After taking a bite of the hamburger, Lassie said vaguely, didn't you find out anything? I told you that Lydia is not an ordinary woman. Let's give up on this case. There is no reward for solving it anyway. No, I have found out the answer. Luo An turned his head and glanced at Lydia, who was lying on the bed, and kept asking him to untie her legs with his mouth. He frowned and said, do you know where Verine's home is? The matter is too big for a small detective to handle. It's time to give the leader more responsibility. Thank you for your support. The data of the follow-up reading during the new book period is the most important. I implore all book friends not to support the book. Thank you all. Chapter 53 Reporting to the Chief. Please read. Please collect. Lydia told the truth. Hearing Roan's words, Lassie was shocked, and then hurriedly swallowed the hamburger in her mouth, and said to the phone with a serious expression, Roan, you didn't torture Lydia, did you? Don't do this. If Lydia's lawyer asks for a physical examination later, all the answers you ask now will be denied by the judge. Looking back at Lydia sitting on the bed, Roan curled his lips. Don't worry, I know my limits, and didn't torture her. You'd better tell me Verine's home address as soon as possible. Okay. After a moment of silence, thinking of Roan's performance in the previous case solving process, Lassie chose to believe him, so she said, Verine's home is not far from here. I can drive you there. Okay, you call Verine's first, and I'll take Lydia downstairs right away. Nodding, Roan hung up the phone, turned to look at Lydia, and said seriously, Lydia, I will take you to my superior and ask her to add you to the first level witness protection list. But the premise is that you didn't lie to me just now, and you didn't play tricks on the way to the superior's house, understand? Believe me, Luo An. Lydia's expression was also very serious. When Luo An untied the stockings on her legs, but did not untie the handcuffs on her wrists, Lydia rushed to the bottle next to the bed without saying a word, grabbed a bottle of wine, and drank it up. She was almost dying of thirst. Drink less, Lydia. Luo An took out a woman's coat from the hanger beside her, covered Lydia's bare shoulders, and laughed. I don't want to see the superior later. She suspects that I'm joking with a drunkard in the middle of the night. Heh. Throwing the bottle, Lydia rolled her eyes at Luo An fiercely. Why did I drink so much wine? Someone doesn't know? Luo An shrugged his shoulders. What does it have to do with me? I told you before, but you didn't believe it. On the way, Roan and Lydia sat in the back seat, and Lassie was in charge of driving. At a traffic light, the car slowly stopped. Lassie saw the handcuffs on Lydia's wrists through the rearview mirror, and her eyelids twitched. If she was not mistaken, the handcuffs seemed to be the same handcuffs she and her female companion used when playing games on the bed. "What's wrong, Lassie?" Seeing Lassie looking at him, Roan asked in confusion. "Is there any problem?" Lydia, who was thinking about something with her head down, heard this and turned her eyes to Lassie. "There is something wrong with both of you." Lassie let out a long breath, swallowed a lot of questions in her heart, and finally picked up the mobile phone in the passenger seat and shook it. "Nothing. I just want to tell you that Verenus didn't seem to be in a good mood when she answered the phone just now." Verenus was indeed in a bad mood. She originally wanted to conceal the fact that Roan's application to join the Foundation was rejected for a while. When the Lake female corpse serial murder case was solved, she would resubmit the application, and this matter would pass quietly without Roan knowing. But I didn't expect Lassie to contact me suddenly just now, saying that Luo An had something urgent and would come to see me later. Should I tell Luo An about this news? If I tell him, as a leader, I promised to invite him at the beginning, but later told him that I didn't do it, where would I put my face? If I don't tell him, what if Luo An asks me about it? In the study room of the apartment, Verenus looked at the small notebook in front of her with a complicated expression and continued to struggle. Ding dong, the doorbell rang, and Verenus, who was thinking with her head down, trembled. After waking up, she hurried to the door of the apartment. Through the peephole of the door, she saw that the people coming were Luo An and his friends. Verenus opened the door without hesitation. But the moment the door opened, Verenus' pupils shrank instantly, and she suddenly realized one thing: she was wearing very loose home clothes at this time. "Good evening, sir." The door opened, and seeing the loose home clothes in front of him, with light makeup on her face, and the whole person's temperament was far less cold than Verenus at work, Luo An's eyebrows trembled. But his tone did not change. Luo An grabbed Lydia beside him, brought her in front of him, and explained, "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you after get off work, but this is an urgent matter. Let's talk inside." Verenus had a blank expression on her face and a cold tone. She motioned for Luo An and the other two to enter the house and close the door of the apartment. Then she turned and walked directly to the bedroom, saying, "Wait for me in the living room. Make your own coffee." "Okay." Luo An and Lydia sat down on the sofa, and Lassie walked aside to make coffee. Lydia glanced in the direction of the bedroom, curled the corner of her mouth, and leaned close to Luo An's ear, and whispered, "Do you like guys who are older than you?" "No, I just like guys who are older." Luo An glanced at Lydia, threw the women's coat that fell on the ground into Lydia's arms, covering the seductive cleavage, and said calmly, "Don't play around, Lydia. Verenus is the person who can decide your life and death in the future. You'd better leave a good impression on her." Hearing this, Lydia's face fell, and she wanted to continue to say something, but Lassie had already come back with a few cups of coffee. The three of them sat on the sofa and drank coffee in silence. A few minutes later, Verenus, who had changed into a women's suit and whose makeup had become cold again, walked out of the bedroom and said directly to the three people on the sofa, "Roan, go into the study. Lassie, keep an eye on this lady." "Okay, sir." Roan got up and left the sofa, and Lassie sat down next to Lydia and whispered, "Lydia, can you tell me the name and contact information of the new female bartender in your bar?" Lydia. "In the study. Sit down." Verenus' words were very brief. After the two sat down, she stuffed the small notebook on the table back into the drawer. After a few seconds of silence, Verenus decided to tell Luo An that he was rejected to join the Foundation, but Luo An suddenly stared at Verenus' face and asked in a deep voice, "Sir, are you sure that our conversation here is 100% safe?" Luo An didn't think that anyone would eavesdrop on the FBI team leader, but it was always better to be careful. Hearing this, Verenus' expression suddenly changed from cold to dark. It was not because she was dissatisfied with Luo An's questioning of the safety of the study, but she found that the urgent matter Luo An mentioned was probably more urgent than she thought. "Wait a minute." Without hesitation, Verenus opened a drawer at the bottom of the desk, which contained a large dark brown box. After pressing the switch on the big box hard, Verenus looked up and stared at Luo An. "You can talk now." Looking at Verenus deeply, Luo An coughed lightly and said, "This is what happened, sir. excluding the process of interrogating Lydia. Luo An told the whole thing to Verinus. Finally, he said with a serious face, "Sir, this matter is too serious. I, an agent, cannot make the decision. I can only add you. I can only seek your help. Thanks to the recommendation votes of book friends such as Lifelong Bastard, Tattoo, A Smile and Pass 483, Old Bird, Little Fish, Adan Age 80, Hellfire Tribulation, Jiazhao, and Jaluxifer, Dengjin 2004, Tangman Blackhand, Juan, The Pig Was Blown Away by the Wind, Old Wang, a severe patient of online novels, and Through Wind and Rain etc. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 54 Auction Item number 113. Please read. Please recommend. I must confirm the authenticity of this matter. Luo An. After listening to Luo An's narration, Verines closed her eyes with a solemn expression, rubbed her temples with her right hand for a while, and then opened her eyes, and said to Luo An, regarding the contact named Daisy, you ask Lydia to write down all the information she knows, and give it to me. I will find a way to find out the specific situation of the other party. Okay, sir. Luo An nodded, took the paper and pen, turned around and left the study. He knew how difficult this matter was. The other party was a senior official of the NSA, the National Security Agency of the United States. A bar owner wanted to bring down a senior official of a well-known intelligence unit of the federal government. In the United States, a magical country with no corruption and all legal political donations, the success rate of such a thing is probably lower than the probability of Luo An's successful election and becoming president. But the matter still needs to be reported. Luo An learned about this matter from Lydia, so he had a reason to be silenced by the senior officials of the NSA. Although Luo An had a system and felt that he would not die for a short time, he did not want to become 007 and be targeted by governments of various countries. In the end, he was taken to the laboratory and 3 connections, 2 inspections, and 1 research were carried out. However, Luo An was not panicked. After observing several times before, he found that Verines's background was not simple. At this time, the time was 2005. Verines could become a team leader as a woman in the male-dominated FBI. No fool would believe that she had no background at all. After seeing the jammer under the other party's desk just now, Luo An was more convinced of his judgment. Although he did not know what Verines's background was, after hearing the whole incident, she did not order him to forget about it on the spot and pretend that it had never happened, but wanted to confirm the authenticity of the incident before making a decision. Luo An's mouth curled slightly. This matter was settled. Let the big guys deal with the big guys, and don't get involved in the struggles between parties and departments. As an ordinary FBI agent, getting some practical benefits that can be obtained is the kingly way. A few minutes later, Roan put the information about Daisy, mentioned by Lydia, on the desk. Verines nodded and asked Roan to go out and wait for a while. He closed the brown box, edited the information about Daisy into an email, and sent it to the head of the second investigation team who was on duty at the FBI New York branch building today. Verines asked him to investigate the other party's identity as quickly as possible and keep the process confidential. 30 minutes later, the information about Daisy was encrypted and sent to Verines's computer. Seeing an old woman in a car in the garage, she was shot in the forehead and died on the spot. The items in the apartment were not lost, but it was judged by the Los Angeles Police Department as a case of burglary. Verines narrowed her eyes slightly. After thinking for a moment, she bent down and took out a big Blackbird mobile phone, pressed the number and called. Why are you calling this number, Verines? At the FBI Washington headquarters, the elderly white man Clement saw the big Bird mobile phone handed to him by the secretary. His expression was stern, and he immediately sat up straight. But after hearing that it was Verines on the other end of the phone, Clement said very unhappily, "Do you know what this call means? Just for an agent? No, it's the NSA." Verines didn't waste any words and directly repeated the incident that Luo An said from a third-person perspective, and finally said with a serious expression, "This is what happened. I will send you the information later. Mr. Clement, the NSA has crossed the line this time. NSA, the National Security Agency of the United States, is affiliated with the Department of Defense, and its work content is to monitor radio broadcasts, communications and the internet. FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, is affiliated with the Department of Justice, and its work content is anti-terrorism, counter-espionage and criminal investigation. You are right, someone has crossed the line. After listening to Veronis's words, Clement narrowed his eyes and thought slowly, speculating which senior NSA executive did this, while also thinking about how this matter can help his career. For example, one step further. Don't think that the intelligence organizations in the United States are harmonious. In fact, many times, they want to kill each other on the spot and take over the power themselves. Who among the top intelligence officials doesn't want to be J. Edgar Hoover? You did a great job on this, Veronis. After thinking for a long time, Clement decided to talk to the head of the NSA in the White House tomorrow, and then smiled into the phone with great satisfaction. As expected of our Clement family, even women are better than men from other families. I didn't investigate this, Mr. Clement. Hearing the words on the other end of the phone, Veronis snorted and said, it was investigated by Agent Roan, who was refused to join the foundation by you, because he said he was not qualified. Hearing this, Clement fell silent, then shook his head and smiled. Veronis, I know you admire Roan Greenwood, but lying is not a good habit. You have to know that, if you force someone to a high position without the corresponding ability, the final result can only be that he will fall into the mud under everyone's feet. Veronis said without any nonsense. The case was discovered by Roan. The witness was found by Roan. The other party applied for witness protection and was willing to testify in court, and was also persuaded by Roan. Okay, Veronis, no need to say more, I believe you. At the Washington headquarters, Clement patted his head in annoyance with a complicated expression, and finally sighed and said, I promise you, I will approve Roan Greenwood's application to join the Columbus Foundation, and at the same time raise his rank to the level of senior agent. Okay. Not enough, Mr. Clement. Hearing the sigh on the other end of the phone, Veronis's mouth curled up, and she was in a very good mood. Recalling what Luo An had said before, when he was narrating the case, that he had neither a car nor a house, Veronis's eyelids twitched and she said, the FBI notified internally a few days ago that a batch of stolen goods of criminals were going to be auctioned internally. I remember there is a small apartment worth $900,000 in Greenwich Village, Manhattan. Why not sell it to Agent Luo An for $500,000? No. This joke is not funny, Veronis. Upon hearing this, Clement's voice immediately raised, and he decisively refused. The market price of that apartment is over $1.2 million. A price of $900,000 is already the limit of the benefits that the FBI gives to internal personnel. $500,000 is absolutely impossible. How about $800,000? $500,000. It's settled. I'll tell Luo An later. If he wants to buy it, I'll call you again. Veronis, who knew the inside story, curled her lips and hung up the phone without saying a word. Damn it, they actually blackmailed their own uncle. Hearing the busy tone on the phone, Clement's face twitched, and he took several deep breaths to suppress the dissatisfaction in his heart. However, $500,000 is also the starting price of the apartment. Clement did not lose money, but just did not make any money. Of course, for some people, not making any money is a loss. After a long silence, Clement got up and left the office. After pushing open the door, he threw the phone into the secretary's arms and said in a deep voice, prepare the car. I'm going to the office in the White House. In addition, temporarily remove auction item number 113 from the list, and someone will contact you to buy it later. The secretary nodded. He was no longer surprised by this kind of thing. Okay, sir. Tracking data is really important for the author. Everyone must not support the book. Thank you all. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55. Working harder. Please save. Please read. In the study, Veronis hung up the big butt phone and put it back under the desk. After a moment of silence, she asked Luo An to take Lydia into the study. Luo An and Lydia sat down, and Verinus leaned back, crossed her legs, and said to Lydia expressionlessly, "Ms. Lydia, I have contacted my superior, and he will contact the top management of the Marshal Service to add you to the list of personnel in the witness protection program to protect your life from now on." Lydia breathed a sigh of relief when she heard this, but Verinus said immediately, "Within the next 48 hours, you must sell the Flame Queen. Except for the Flame Queen bar, all your other real estate will be frozen and confiscated by the FBI. After you have finished testifying in court, for the sake of your own safety, you must follow the Marshal Service to completely leave New York, and you cannot come back in this life." "What did you say?" Lydia was mentally prepared to leave New York, but when she heard that the FBI was going to confiscate her building, she was immediately furious and shouted at Verinus, "Are you FBI also targeting my money? Ms. Lydia, please watch your words." Facing Lydia with anger flashing in her eyes, Verinus kept her expression unchanged. She glanced at Roan, who was daydreaming, stared into Lydia's eyes and said coldly, "First, you tried to murder my federal agent. Assaulting a federal agent is a felony. If you hadn't chosen to report the case and join the witness protection program, I would have sent you directly to the federal felony prison and let you spend the rest of your life with those crazy women and murderers. Second, you confessed the case after being interrogated by Agent Roan, so your behavior is not surrendering. Third, the money you used to buy the building was all illegally obtained. Freezing them is a legal act stipulated by federal law. Not only will your money be frozen, but the funds of all people involved in the case will be frozen later." "Shit." Lydia's pretty face turned the color of liver, and she roared at Verinus, "Don't think I don't know what you are up to. You FBI and NSA people are just trying to steal money from me. Damn it, I shouldn't have said this. If you don't say this." Verinus opened the ML on the computer and played the photo of the corpse in it, showing it to Lydia. "The tragic situation of this lady Bettina should happen to you soon. By the way, this Bettina is a daisy you mentioned." Seeing the familiar old woman in the photo sitting in the car with a bullet hole on her forehead and her eyes wide open, Lydia's face turned pale, her legs weakened, and she sat back on the chair. She was just guessing at first, but now the photo told her that you guessed right. The top NSA has already sent people to kill people to silence them. Seeing the horrified expression on Lydia's face, Verinus pressed the mouse to put away the photo and asked calmly, "Ms. Lydia, which is more important, money or life? I think you should be able to tell the difference." A few minutes later, Lydia, who was pale, was taken to another bedroom in the apartment by Lassie. From tonight until tomorrow, when the marshals arrived, Lassie would follow Lydia closely to protect her safety. If nothing unexpected happens, after Lydia testifies in court, she will be arranged to a remote small city in the Federation, with a new identity, and she will not be able to show off, and she will spend the rest of her life in fear. This is more painful for Lydia, who likes to enjoy, and is used to swaggering around every day, than killing her. Seeing Lassie taking Lydia into the bedroom, Verinus tilted her head, and glanced at Luo An, who had been silent all the time. Her eyes moved slightly, and she asked calmly, "Are you pitying Lydia?" "Pity? No." Hearing this, Luo An shook his head repeatedly. He and Lydia only had a simple relationship in bed, and there was no emotional entanglement. Moreover, Lydia had drugged him before, preparing to control his behavior. If she hadn't finally confessed this big case, Luo An had actually made plans to make Lydia regret coming into this world. The scenery at the bottom of the Hudson River should be nice. At the same time, in this large-scale honey trap case, the top NSA executives are not good people. Those political prisoners who exploited the people in their own country, abused their power for personal gain, and finally ran to the federal government to enjoy life are not good people. The women like Lydia who carried out the honey trap plan are not good people either. It's just a dog-eat-dog fight between them. If Lydia was coerced, that would be another matter. But she knew what she was doing from beginning to end, and the current ending was just her own fault. Looking at Verinus, who looked very cold because of her macup, Roan grinned and said, "I was just thinking about what reward the boss would give me for solving this big case." Taking Roan back to the study, the two sat down, and Verinus crossed her legs. "You know, Roan, This case is special, so the FBI New York branch will not acknowledge the existence of this case, nor will it provide you with any reward. Roan nodded. He had guessed it would be like this. The case involves the top officials of the NSA intelligence department, so it is normal not to tell anyone. If the FBI New York branch really announced that Roan had cracked the case, he would have to hurry up and run away. So the reward Roan wanted refers to the person behind Vereen's. He wants to get his share. Before you came to me tonight, the Columbus Foundation sent me an email. Seeing Roan staring at her, Vereen's was silent for a moment, but still did not choose to hide the matter of the foundation. After briefly introducing the course of events, Vereen's said that Roan not only successfully joined the foundation, but also obtained the funding level of a senior agent as an ordinary official agent. Of course, this is what you deserve, and it is not a reward. Hearing this, Roan raised his eyebrows, and he knew that there must be something else. Vereen's opened a website, flipped through it, and did not find the auction item number 113. Her eyebrows first frowned, and then suddenly realized, and then opened another website. Turning the computer screen to Luo An, Verena smiled and said, half a year ago, our FBI successfully arrested a big liar who was cheating all over the world. This small apartment is one of his properties in Greenwich Village, Manhattan, New York. The apartment is sold for $1.2 million to the public, and the FBI sells it for $900,000. If you want it, it's yours for $500,000. Seeing the spacious, bright, warm and sunny apartment on the computer screen, Luo An smiled. Thank you, sir. I will prepare the money tomorrow. An apartment in Manhattan that was sold for $1.2 million in 2005. He only needed $500,000 to buy it. If he let it go, Luo An would regret it for the rest of his life. Seeing the smile on Luo An's face, Verena's expression remained unchanged, but she was in a good mood. After hearing Luo An's words, she pondered for a moment and said, after this case is handled, you will receive a considerable bonus. In addition, regarding this apartment, you can apply for a loan within the Columbus Foundation. It is about 1% minus 3% lower than the interest rates of those banks outside, and you can pay it back slowly in the future. Thank you for your kindness, sir, but I want to buy this apartment directly in full. Hearing Luo An's words, Verena's face changed, and she looked at him suspiciously and asked, can you come up with $500,000? Of course. Luo An nodded, looked up and saw the expression on Verena's face, realizing that she might have misunderstood something, so she hurriedly waved her hand and said, don't get me wrong, sir, I didn't violate the FBI regulations. I can come up with $500,000 because I work harder and get more bonuses. Verenas. Chapter 56 Laptop. Please read. Please recommend. As mentioned before, tomorrow is the weekend and also the day for salary payment. Just now, when he lowered his head, Luo An did a simple calculation. His basic salary this month is $2,000. The New York Journalists Association offered a reward of $50,000 for catching the murderer who killed the reporter in the park, and he actually received $25,000. The reward for the killer was $5,000, and he actually received $2,500. The murder of Conrad also led to the murder of the congressman, and the reward was $500,000, but he actually received $30,000. The serial killer was arrested, and the murderer was arrested. The actual reward was $100,000, and the actual reward was $50,000. The bonus was $1,500, which doubled to $3,000. The congressman's wife, Ms. Yarland, gave Luo An a thank you money of $50,000 and a hush money of $100,000. All in all, it is about $262,500. In addition, there is the thank you money of $1 million promised by Darren and his wife before, and Luo An can get at least $300,000 of this money. With these, Roan could get $562,500, enough to buy the apartment. Of course, there is also the tax problem of America's only death and tax payment are inseparable. But Roan is not in a hurry. He can find a suitable accountant later, and those accountants will help him deal with the tax problem. The next day, Saturday, Roan got up from the sofa in the living room of Berenice's apartment, took a simple personal hygiene, and took a taxi to the Jacob Federal Building. Originally, the FBI was not working on Saturdays and weekends, but Darren and his wife promised to pay the thank you money today, so there was no reason for the people in the number 5 investigation team not to come. Of course, Lassie didn't come. She was still guarding Lydia at Berenice's home until the marshals came and took Lydia away. Berenice didn't come to the Federal Building either. She drove directly to Washington in the morning. Roan thought it must be the people behind her who came to talk to her. Good morning, Roan. Good morning. Entering the 5th investigation team, Augustus had not arrived yet, and the agents greeted Roan enthusiastically. Roan's arms were also stuffed with a lot of breakfast and drinks. Sitting at his workstation, Roan's face was full of smiles. Sure enough, the soup was not in vain. You came quite early, Roan. After Roan ate a bag of breakfast, Mona also arrived at the 5th investigation team. After she sat down in her seat, she immediately turned to look at Roan and asked with a serious expression, "Roan, where is my laptop?" Hearing Mona's words, Roan blinked and didn't react for a while. After thinking for a long time, he remembered that Mona was talking about the computer that Mr. Darren smashed in anger. Let's put the computer aside for now, Mona. Swallowing the coffee in his mouth, Roan took Mona into the team leader's office and locked the door of the team leader's office under the various gazes of the agents. After a moment of silence, the office area of investigation team 5 suddenly began to buzz with the sound of people talking. In the team leader's office, Mona frowned, stared at Luo An, and said in a serious tone, "Luo An, what are you doing? I got some news about your father yesterday." Ignoring Mona's defensive posture, Luo An pulled a chair over and sat in front of her and told her the news that his father Javarie Evans was being investigated by the CIA and the NSA could not find any clues, so they targeted Mona. After Luo An finished her narration, Mona's eyes were slightly red. After a long silence, she whispered, "I know, Luo An, thank you very much." Hearing that the other party's voice was a little wrong, Luo An did not ask about the private affairs between Mona and his father, but said in a deep voice, "According to regulations, I must report the surveillance of FBI agents to the team leader Augustus. But before that, I still want to ask your attitude. If you refuse, I can." "No, report it, Luo An, I'm fine." Mona took a deep breath, suppressed all the emotions in her heart, and looked up at Luo An. "I'm fine. Believe me, I will make it clear with Augustus." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Seeing Mona's firm attitude, Luo An nodded and stopped persuading. When he was about to turn around and leave, Mona suddenly walked up to hug Luo An and whispered, "Thank you." Without waiting for Luo An to answer, Mona loosened her arms again, took a deep breath, opened the door of the team leader's office and walked out. Luo An's eyelids moved slightly and followed Mona out of the office. Just as they returned to their respective workstations, Mona suddenly turned around and looked at him seriously. "Luo An, where is my laptop?" Luo An's mouth twitched. "Is the disk stuck?" Seeing that Luo An had a strange expression, Mona snorted twice and said directly, "I already know that Darren smashed my computer, and I also know that he promised to compensate us with 10 computers, but you changed the subject and deceived me yesterday, so when the laptop arrives in a few days, the laptop that belongs to you will belong to me." Luo An was stunned. "I just told you. These are two different things, Luo An." Mona waved her hand, indicating that one thing was one thing. "You changed the subject yesterday and hid the fact that your computer was smashed from me, so your computer belongs to me. I'm very grateful for your news today, so how about I treat you to dinner tonight? To a restaurant, or to my house? I just learned a new dish recently." After a moment of silence, Luo An tentatively asked, "What about after dinner?" Mona had a serious expression and crossed her hands in front of her chest. "No, I haven't been feeling well recently." Luo An was just about to ask Mona when she felt well, when Augustus, with a big belly and a big black face full of smiles, suddenly walked in from the door of investigation team number 5. Waving the 2 checks in his hand, Augustus, with a smile that showed his back teeth, announced loudly, "The thank you money from Mr. Darren and Miss Sabina has arrived, and everyone will wait for the bonus." There was a second of silence, and the entire number 5 investigation team suddenly became jubilant, and everyone gave Luo An the warmest applause. Well done, Luo An. Augustus walked to Luo An, slapped him on the shoulder, praised him a few times, and pulled him into the team leader's office. After sitting down, Augustus took out one of the checks and handed it to Luo An. After Luo An took it and looked at the $500,000 on it, his eyes lit up. 500,000 belongs to you, and the remaining 500,000 belongs to the investigation team. This is what Mr. Darren specifically told me before. Augustus looked at Luo An with great satisfaction. The more he looked at him, the more he felt that he had some of his own style in the past. Then he took out a bunch of car keys and a business card from his pocket and handed them to Luo An. This is the Chevrolet car and her business card that Miss Sabina gave you privately. At the same time, she also asked me to ask you if you want to attend the party she is hosting tonight. If you don't want to go, forget it. If you go, there will be a surprise. Luo An. Thinking of the picture of Sabina hugging Darren and crying, but her fingers hooked on him, Luo An's mouth twitched, and he shook his head decisively to refuse the invitation to participate in the party. He was afraid that he would be exhausted to death at the party. Seeing Luo An shaking his head and refusing, Augustus didn't say much. Luo An wanted to tell Augustus about what happened last night, but Augustus said that Verines had already informed him, and this matter would be treated as if it had never happened from now on. Luo An decisively changed the subject, which was the issue of Mona being targeted by the NSA. Before Luo An left the office, Augustus said solemnly, Luo An, you should have a good rest over the weekend. Starting from next Monday, you must hurry up to solve the Lake female corpse serial murder case. If you are sure that you can't solve it, tell me immediately, okay? You have been in the spotlight this time, and someone has already set his sights on you. Hearing this, Luo An narrowed his eyes slightly, tilted his head, and said to Augustus, I know, sir, please rest assured. Augustus was relieved to see this, nodded and finally said, by the way, call Mona to me after you go out. Luo An paused, frowned slightly, and was about to say something, but Augustus saw his expression and said directly, don't worry, Luo An, Mona is from the FBI, and is from my number 5 investigation team. It's not the NSA's turn to intervene in her affairs, but I need to know some inside information before I can help her. Hearing this, Luo An breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you, sir. Without saying anything else, Roan turned and left the team leader's office. Augustus looked down at Mona's identity information in the folder. His eyes flickered, and he whispered to himself, CIA, NSA. After returning to his workstation, Roan motioned Mona to go to the team leader's office, and he took the relevant information about the Lake Corpse serial murder case from Reed's desk, and began to look through it carefully. Thank you all for your support of this book. Thank you all. Please collect and read. Chapter 57 Barbecue Party. Please read. Please collect. Monday, 7:50 in the morning. In the parking lot of the Jacob Federal Building, a Chevrolet slowly stopped. Roan took off his seatbelt and got out of the car. Ryder, who was covered in lumps, also got out of the backseat of the car. I'll go get a cup of black coffee, Roan. Ryder looked down at his watch and saw that there was still a long time before the stipulated time for work, so he pointed to the coffee shop across the parking lot and asked Roan with a smile, would you like a cup? Of course. But ordinary coffee will do. Remember to add sugar and milk. Roan smiled bitterly, I prefer sweets. Okay. Ryder grinned at him, nodded, and turned to walk towards the coffee shop. Roan patted his heavy head and turned to walk into the Federal Building. On Saturday, after Augustus distributed bonuses to everyone, the agents decisively left the office area and went home to start their weekend life. Many of the agents invited Roan to their homes, but Roan smiled and shook his head and refused because he had received his salary and bonus, and he was in a hurry to deal with the apartment. With the help of the people above, the purchase and transfer process of the apartment was very simple and did not waste too much time. Before noon, Luo An got the key to the apartment and the relevant contract certificate. Then there was the decoration of the apartment. The previous owner of the apartment had a very strange aesthetic. Luo An scanned the rooms and was very upset. He decisively chose to throw away all the rooms and redecorate. Luo An didn't know much about decoration, but he knew there were a lot of tricks in it, so he decisively took out his phone and prepared to find someone for help. Mona couldn't do it. Not only was she talking to Augustus and had no time, but the small apartment she bought with a loan before was the kind of apartment that had been renovated. She couldn't help Luo An. Lassie couldn't do it either. Although she claimed to rent a house in recent years, she spent most of her time in hotels with other women. If he asked her for help, Luo An felt that Lassie would most likely throw him a bunch of business cards of women who worked in decoration companies. So Luo An turned his attention to Riyadh. Riyadh was married, had a wife and children, and had a gun store at home. It was just right to ask him for decoration. It just so happened that Ryder had invited him to his gun shop, so Roan did not hesitate, called Ryder, bought some beef and wine, and drove to Queens in his Chevrolet. Ryder's wife is named Yvonne, from Texas, and is a former New York police officer. During a mission, Yvonne's right eye was injured by a stray bullet. Although her life was not in danger, her right eye was completely blind, and she also had a dark eye patch on her forehead. However, Yvonne had a good attitude. After Ryder and Roan introduced their identities, Yvonne decisively threw her son to Ryder, took Roan to the back of the gun store and compared pistols. After a round of shooting, Yvonne and Roan became good brothers. Ryder. That night, a barbecue party was held in the backyard of Ryder's house. With Yvonne's introduction, Roan successfully met a lot of rednecks from Texas. There were people who found fault with him, but after Roan drank a bottle of strength potion and won the arm wrestling match against everyone present, he instantly became a good brother in Texas. At the barbecue party, Roan drank a little too much and slept until the next day at Riyadh's house. Just when he got up from the bed and had a headache after washing up, Ivana pushed open the door of the second bedroom and handed Roan a bottle of wine. She said that he didn't need to be afraid of a headache after drinking too much, and he would be fine after drinking more wine. Roan. Shaking his head to reject Ivana's kindness, Roan hurriedly told Riyadh and his wife that he needed to renovate his apartment and find someone to help. After hearing this, Ivana and Riyadh said that these were all trivial matters, and they patted their chests decisively and agreed. Ivana said that she would definitely help Roan find a decoration company with reasonable prices, authentic materials, and good technical level. Then there was another barbecue party. Luo An. After the incident with Lydia, the system gave Luo An an excellent evaluation, and the treasure chest opened. 1 physical potion, 1 strength potion, 1 antidote potion, 1 danger perception potion. As for the party in the past 2 days, the system gave Luo An a passing evaluation, and the treasure chest opened. 1 physical potion, 1 weakness potion, 1 strength potion, 1 sleep potion. At this time, Luo An's system backpack had 4 physical potions, 1 fire resistance potion, 2 night vision potions, 1 scuba potion, 2 strength potions, 1 agility potion, 1 antidote potion, 1 danger perception potion, 1 weakness potion, 1 sleep potion. Taking the elevator of the Jacob Federal Building to the floor, Luo An ran into the team leader Bruce An and several of his men as soon as the elevator door opened. "Good morning, sir." Luo An walked out of the elevator, grinning, very polite. Bruce gave Roan a cold look and walked directly into the elevator without saying anything. A white man behind him, wearing a suit and with an unhappy look on his face, snorted coldly when he passed by Roan, but did not say much. Roan raised his eyebrows. He did not know the other person. Watching the elevator door slowly close, Roan raised the corners of his mouth slightly, turned around and walked into the number 5 investigation team. In the elevator, the white man with an unhappy look on his face was Matthews. As an old man who had followed Bruce for 10 years, Matthews learned that Bruce was exiled and became the head of the newly established number 14 investigation team. He did not hesitate and decisively chose to leave the number 1 investigation team and followed Bruce to the number 14 investigation team. As the elevator slowly descended, Matthews was silent for a moment, then walked to Bruce and whispered, "Sir, the number 5 investigation team still has a serial murder case that has not been solved. We don't bother with them for now." Glancing at Matthews, Bruce had mixed feelings about his old subordinate. After a moment of silence, he said. Just deal with our own cases first and keep an eye on them. Don't make any moves without my orders. Okay, sir. Matthews nodded. The elevator door opened and he hurriedly followed Bruce out. Number 5 investigation team. Mona hadn't come yet and Lassie was sleeping on the table again. Roan looked around the office area of the number 5 investigation team, sat down next to a male technician who was drinking coffee and chatting with others on the computer, and whispered, "Good morning, William. Is there any news about the new team leader Bruce recently?" William Miller, 178 centimeters tall, with deep features and a thin body, is one of the technicians of the number 5 investigation team. According to the requirements of the case, he is generally responsible for contacting other government departments outside the FBI, such as CIA, NSA, etc. But in Luo An's opinion, William's greatest ability is that he can always get the latest news from his countless friends in any corner of the building at any time. In this regard, even Lassie from the intelligence department is not as good as him. Thanks to 7 Hell, Long Zuhan, Zeman Shui, Panan, 181 **093, Ocean Shepherd, Fox, Talking About the World Without Knowing, James Rain Dream and other book friends for their recommendation votes. Thank you all. Chapter 58 Case Situation. Please read. Please recommend. Good morning, Luo An. Hearing Luo An's question, William, who was drinking coffee, smiled and waved his hand to signal Luo An to lower his head. Then he whispered in Luo An's ear, "I heard that a bank robbery case was handed over to the 14th investigation team recently. Because the 14th investigation team has just been established, there are fewer people in the team than us. So although Bruce is the team leader, he has to go to the front line every day to investigate the case." TSK. Luo An shook his head repeatedly when he heard this. When Bruce was the team leader before, he no longer went to the front line in person. Now that he has been promoted to the team leader, he has to go out to investigate the case every day. This is really Luo An grinned, patted William on the shoulder, and returned to his workstation. Luo An's evaluation of Bruce's current state is only 4 words. It's his own fault. Before, he reported the serial murder and dismemberment case to the media, which was a naked act of dragging his feet. The leaders above the team leader are not blind, so how could they not punish Bruce? Luo An originally thought that the superiors would stop Bruce's promotion or even demote him, but seeing Bruce's current appearance and thinking of Verinus's words that Bruce joined another foundation, it seems that the foundation that Bruce joined is not simple either. After thinking for a long time, Luo An shook his head. It was not his turn to worry about these things at the moment, so he decisively threw the idea in his mind into the trash can. Picking up the folder on the desktop, Luo An looked at the relevant information of the Lake female corpse serial murder case again. The place where the bodies were found was a lake at the border between New York and New Jersey. All 4 bodies were female. When they were salvaged, there was no item around them that could prove their identity. In the end, it was the local police in New Jersey who investigated the missing persons file and confirmed their identities. The autopsy report showed that the 4 victims were strangled to death by ropes, with signs of binding on their wrists and ankles, bruises on the upper body, and lacerations on the lower body. It is suspected that the 4 victims had been tortured by the murderer before their death. Because the bodies stayed at the bottom of the lake for too long, the possible white genetic material of the murderer or other information related to the murderer has disappeared, and the forensic doctor did not find any material other than the victims. In addition, the home addresses, social environments, life experiences, and work content of the 4 victims seemed to have no connection. The only common feature was that they were all married, and the rings on the bodies also disappeared. In the process of investigating the kidnapping case, Luo An speculated that the murderer took off the rings on the victim's hands because they were souvenirs or possessive. Just like Luo An wanted to replace all the decorations in the apartment after buying it, this is the subconscious thought of humans, to erase the marks of the previous owners of the items. So Luo An asked Riyad to mainly investigate the husbands of the 4 victims, investigate their interpersonal relationships, work content, emotional life, etc., hoping to find some clues. But Seeing Riyadh's investigation materials, Luo An's mouth twitched. In Riyadh's report, the interpersonal relationships and work contents of the 4 victims' husbands were all dictated by the husbands, and Riyadh did not ask other people to verify whether the contents of the 4 husbands were true or false. As for the love lives of the 4 husbands, Riyadh's record only had one sentence. Neighbors said that they had a good relationship and rarely quarreled. Luo An, thinking that Ryder was from the SWAT team and was good at persuading people physically, but was not very good at investigating cases, Luo An took a deep breath and forced down the dirty words in his heart. Your coffee is here, Luo An. Luo An had just closed the folder in his hand when Ryder, whose suit was about to burst, walked into the number 5 investigation team and put a cup of hot coffee on Luo An's table. He grinned, revealing his white teeth. Add milk and sugar, your favorite. With a twitch of his mouth, Luo An took a sip of the coffee, and after a moment of silence, he tilted his head to look at Ryder. Just as he was about to ask a few questions, the door of the number 5 investigation team was suddenly pushed open, and August, with a big belly, walked in with Mona. Bang! After slapping Lass's desk hard to wake her up, Augustus reached out and grabbed the whiteboard at the front of the office area, shouting, "A new week has begun. Everyone wake up. Now, everyone, focus on this serial murder case. We must solve it this week and catch the real murderer." At this point, Augustus looked around and found that everyone's attention had been attracted by him. He nodded and pointed to William beside him and said, "William, briefly describe the overview of this case." "Okay, sir." William took out a folder and briefly described the case that Luo An had read before to everyone. Augustus nodded with satisfaction and asked him to sit back, then knocked on the whiteboard and shouted again, "This is the situation of the case. I believe some of you should have read it more than once, but I still want to emphasize again that the murderer in this case is not simple, and we can't be sure whether the murderer is still committing crimes. So we must pay 200% attention this week and wait for new information at any time. Do you understand?" "Okay, sir." "Good." Hearing the voices of the detectives, Augustus nodded with satisfaction, then cast his eyes on Luo An, turned and walked towards the team leader's office. "Luo An, come here for a moment." Luo An, seeing the detectives cast all kinds of eyes on him, Luo An sighed, but still followed Augustus into the team leader's office. "Sit down." In the office, Augustus poured a cup of coffee for both of them, sat down on the chair, and said with a serious expression, "Luo An, this case is very important to you." "Luo An, why does this sound so familiar?" Seeing the strange expression on Luo An's face, Augustus was stunned for a moment, and then he reacted. He waved his hand and frowned as he looked at Luo An. "Don't get me wrong, Luo An, I'm not talking about Browson and the others this time." Hearing this, Luo An tilted his head in confusion. "If it's not them, who else could it be?" "It's the police in New Jersey." Augustus took a sip of coffee, and his big black face was very solemn. "You have to know one thing, Luo An, no police in any place like the FBI." Luo An suddenly realized that this was the truth. Because of the power, since the birth of the FBI, police in various regions have been very unhappy with the FBI. In the eyes of the police, solving cases and arresting people is their job. What kind of FBI are you? And if the FBI solves a case that the police can't solve, where will the police put their faces? So many police officers completely ignore FBI agents and never listen to their suggestions and orders. Some more aggressive police officers would even notify the suspect to flee before the FBI arrested him, leaving the FBI with nothing. They would then eat bread, drink coffee, and applaud and laugh with a group of police officers in the back. Don't think these are made up stories. They are real things. It was not until after the plane bombing of the building in 2001 that the relationship between the FBI and local police departments improved a little due to the reform of the Ministry of Justice, and the FBI Washington headquarters established a nationwide criminal record query system. But it's still not good. Although local police will no longer notify suspects to flee, it is still common for them to ignore the FBI or not work hard. So, Luo An. Seeing that Luo An had guessed what he meant, Augustus stared at him and said, "This time, when investigating the case, you should pay more attention to the police in New Jersey." Luo An nodded, licked his lips, and smiled warmly. Don't worry, sir. I never bully others, nor will I allow others to bully me. Thanks to Mo Poheo, Gucheng Tao, Sunayang, Chao Chang'ar, Yi Fiayang, Wen Sangson, Shanhu, Shu Zaos, Xingkang Boy, Jam, 1,989,250, Kaiang Shengai, Feng Shining, Devil Pixie 123 and other book friends for their monthly tickets. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 59 New Jersey. Please read. Please collect. Good. Seeing the look on Roan's face, Augustus nodded with satisfaction. He knew that Roan had always been very sensible, so he stopped talking nonsense and changed the subject and asked, how about Lake female corpse serial murder case? Do you have any ideas now? I remember that Reed got a lot of information in those days. Hearing this, Roan's eyelids twitched, and he felt a headache. He was silent for a moment and then said, according to the information, the murderer took the rings from each victim's hand. I suspect their husbands should know something, so I plan to talk to the husbands of several victims now. Okay. Seeing that Roan already had an idea, Augustus took a sip of coffee and nodded and said, call immediately if you have any questions. Investigation team number 5 is ready for support at any time. Okay, sir. After leaving the team leader's office, Roan first took out the Nokia in his pocket and called Mona to make sure that there was no problem with the communication method, and then took Reed to the equipment warehouse this time. In the equipment warehouse, Roan put on combat uniform and plate carrying vest, holding a tactical helmet in his hand, with 5 smoke bombs and 10 stun grenades in his pocket, and 2 Glock 18 submachine guns on his waist. After taking 3 pistol extended magazines, Roan's eyes moved. This time he was going to the border of New York and New Jersey, which was a bit far from the headquarters, and support could not be available on call. So he took 7 more extended magazines to make an integer. Roan, if you were in the SWAT team, you would definitely survive to the end. Ryder, who was standing by, saw this scene. His eyes lit up, and he decisively threw away the ordinary version of Glock 18, took off his small bulletproof vest, and changed into the same equipment as Roan. The difference is that, because Ryder's waist is wider and his strength is greater, he took a full 20 extended magazines. After changing the equipment, Roan and Ryder looked at each other, saw each other fully armed, laughed, and strode out. Everyone in the 5th investigation team, New Jersey, next to New York, is the 4th smallest and most densely populated state in the United States, nicknamed the Garden State. The destination of Luo An's trip is the Northville area, which is located at the top of New Jersey and belongs to New Jersey. Originally, the case should have been handled by the New Jersey police, but because the lake where the body was found is located at the border between New York and New Jersey, the New Jersey police did not want to cause a lot of trouble due to cross-regional law enforcement, so they decisively chose to report the case to the FBI in New York. The first victim, Linda Chipo, 28 years old, disappeared 8 months ago. The second victim, Beatrice Leon, 34 years old, disappeared 2 months ago. The third victim, Natalie Khalil, 25 years old, disappeared a month ago. The fourth victim, Tamara Terry, 30 years old, disappeared 2 weeks ago. After listening to Ryder's story, Roan sat in the passenger seat and looked down at the autopsy reports of the 4 victims. He nodded and said, let's go to the home of the 4th victim, Tamara Terry. She disappeared 2 weeks ago and was killed. Her husband should be able to remember a lot of things, such as who targeted his wife. No problem. Ryder nodded, turned the steering wheel to turn the sub around, and drove in another direction. Ryder's investigation these days was not useless. At least he now remembered the home addresses of every victim clearly. When the SUV crossed the bridge and entered New Jersey, Roan did not find anything unusual. He thought the scenery in New Jersey was nice and there were many parks. But the closer the car got to the Northville area, the more Roan felt something was wrong. Why were there more and more women wearing scantily clad clothes on both sides of the road? And what did it mean when they grabbed the hands of passing drivers? Most of those women make money with their lower bodies, some full-time and some part-time. Seeing the doubt on Roan's face, Reed shrugged and said nonchalantly, you know, in the Federation, everyone has to work hard to make money to support themselves. Roan didn't know what to say for a moment after hearing this. After hesitating for a moment, he tilted his head and asked, "Don't the New Jersey police care about them?" "Of course. But only when necessary." Reed nodded and shook his head. "The police force is limited. Sometimes a police officer has 3 cases at the same time. How can they have time to take care of these women? And even if they catch them, the punishment is just to lock them up for a period of time. They can be released early by paying some bail. The police are too lazy to waste time on such things." "I understand." Roan pursed his lips and nodded. "The police in the United States are different from the police in the East. The police here are just a job, the kind that goes to work every day and gets paid. Moreover, when grassroots police officers in the United States are working, their superiors will also order them to consider the cost of law enforcement. For women like these on the roadside, the cost of law enforcement is far greater than the benefits of law enforcement. Unless the top police officers give orders and are determined to sweep the area, or there is a major case with a death, these police officers are too lazy to care most of the time." The dark sub continued to move forward and soon arrived at the home of the 4th victim, Tamara Terry, in the Northville area in the northernmost part of New Jersey, a rectangular red bungalow. The two got out of the car and walked forward. Ryder reached out and patted the door of the house hard, shouting loudly, "Sanderson, open the door. I'm Agent Ryder from the FBI. We've met before." Sanderson, Tamara Terry's husband. There was no response in the room. Ryder patted again, but there was still no sound. Roan raised his eyebrows and tilted his head to ask, "Let Mona call him?" Ryder frowned when he heard this. Just as he was about to speak, there was a sound of heavy objects falling to the ground and breaking from the house. Bang! Shit, there's someone in the room. Hearing this noise, Reed no longer hesitated, raised his pistol, kicked the door open and rushed in. "FBI. Don't move." Luo An was full of swear words, but he still quickly followed Reed's actions and searched each room to make sure it was safe. There was no one in the kitchen, living room and other places. Luo An raised his pistol and rushed into the master bedroom in a tactical posture. He didn't find anyone, but there was a corner of pajamas in the corner of the closet door. "The person in the closet, raise your hands and come out by yourself." Luo An stood diagonally on the side of the closet and shouted loudly, "If you don't come out after 3 numbers, I will shoot." 3. Woo woo woo. Hearing the shouting, the person in the closet did not come out, but the sound of sobbing came out, and Luo An was stunned when he heard it, because it was the cry of a child. 10 minutes later, on the sofa in the living room, Reed held a toy in both hands and was whispering to comfort the twitching blonde little lolly. Luo An, who was on the phone next to him, sighed when he saw this scene. Thanks to the book friends such as Fatty Linda, Just Huziang, Milan Complex, Zhang Zionan, Tattoo, Twerwa, Han Binks in 123, Zioyao Foxlord, Lixiogo 483, Bing Feng Izumi, Moses R. Moses, we are all poor, don't be bears, Full House of Flowers drunk, chatting without knowing, the cat lurking for N years, Shiauzu Anilan, Boomerang, Beike Zaro, Yaolong Bing Liang, and Jaluxifer, 7 days uninterrupted for their recommendation votes. Thank you all for your support. Thank you all. Chapter 60. Danny, please read. Please recommend. Danny, 6 years old, is the daughter of Sanderson and Tamara. After her mother was confirmed dead, Sanderson, as a father, did not send Danny to school, nor did he take her to see a psychologist, and did not let Danny contact other children. Instead, he locked her at home. Every day, she ate leftovers from last night. I have called Sanderson, and he said he would be home soon. Hearing Mona's voice on the other end of the phone, Roan nodded and said, "Okay, by the way, contact the New Jersey Government Child Protection Department. There is a little girl here who needs their protection." "Okay, I'll contact them right away." Roan. Ryder, who was sitting on the sofa, comforted Danny for a long time, but she didn't pay attention to him, so she lowered her head and sobbed. Ryder had no choice but to turn his eyes to Roan. When Roan carried Danny out of the bedroom just now, Danny didn't cry all the time. Seeing Ryder's helpless look, Roan was full of black lines. How to communicate with children is his weakest weakness. But in this situation, Roan had no choice but to sit on the sofa, take the toy from Ryder, take a deep breath, and start asking Danny about the model of the toy. Hearing Roan's question, the blonde Danny did not answer, but looked up at Roan for a while, slowly stopped crying, and then lowered her head to hug Roan's arm, not speaking or letting go. Ryder. Roan. A few minutes later, a pickup truck came from a distance at high speed. After leaving a deep brake mark on the ground, a man with a big beard and an unnatural red face ran out of the driver's seat of the pickup truck and rushed towards the rectangular house, shouting, "Danny. Are you okay, Danny?" Seeing that Sanderson finally came back, Roan was about to get up, but found that Danny was holding her arm and refused to let go. After a few seconds of silence, Roan held her in his arms and just looked at the yelling Sanderson quietly. "Who are you?" He reached out to hug Danny, but Danny turned her head away to refuse. Sanderson was stunned and then stared at Roan angrily. "Why are you FBI looking for me again? Do you suspect me of being the murderer? Please control your emotions, Mr. Sanderson." Before he had finished speaking, Sanderson turned around and continued to yell at him. "Fuck you. I remember you. Agent Reed from the FBI. Didn't you ask me for a lot of information before? Why are you looking for me again now? Have you found the murderer who killed my wife?" Seeing Sanderson's flushed face and blurred eyes, and smelling the faint smell of cheap perfume and alcohol on him, Roan's face looked very bad. He tilted his head to signal Reed to block Sanderson, and Roan turned around to carry Danny back to the bedroom. After whispering to her to let go of her arms, Roan closed the bedroom door and walked towards the living room with a serious expression. "Garbage. Bitch. Shit." Sanderson's eyes were blurry at this time, and he was yelling loudly with a mouthful of swear words. Roan didn't waste any words, pulled Ryder away, and kicked Sanderson in the stomach. Bang! Sanderson fell back on the sofa, and Roan picked up the water that he had just poured for Danny on the table in the living room, and poured it directly on his face. Before Sanderson could finish his curse, Roan took out the Glock 18, ignored Ryder's eyes, and stuffed the muzzle of the gun directly into Sanderson's mouth, and asked sternly, "Are you sober? Point awake. Can you talk properly? Point yes." Bang! Roan didn't shoot, but threw the cup of water heavily on the ground. The sound of the cup breaking scared Sanderson's body, and Roan put away the Glock 18 stuffed in his mouth. Turning around and seeing Ryder's serious eyes, Roan raised his eyebrows and pointed at the safety of the Glock 18 calmly. "It wasn't on at all, but it was enough to scare the drunk Sanderson. Ever since my wife disappeared, you police have been telling me we can't say anything." A few minutes later, Sanderson, who had sobered up a lot, sat on the sofa, covering his face, very emotional. "When you contact me again, tell me the news of my wife's death. Now, I don't know what happened to my wife, I only know that she is dead. Instead, you ask me about her news over and over again. Don't you think this is too much? I can understand your feelings, okay?" Roan stared at Sanderson and said in a deep voice, "We want to help you, but before that, you need to help us first. Only in this way can we find the real murderer who killed your wife. So, answer me now, where was your wife when she disappeared?" Hearing Roan's words, Sanderson took a deep breath, pressed his temple and thought for a long time, then whispered, "Tamara is a cashier at Walmart supermarket. That large supermarket is about 15 minutes drive from here. The supermarket closes around 10:30 in the evening, so Tamara usually gets home around 10:50 every day. 3 weeks ago, she called me after get off work and said that she arrived home within 20 minutes and asked me to prepare something for her, so I started to make some food at home. But until 30 minutes later, Tamara did not return. This was my last time I received her news." "Okay. Is it mentioned that she was tracked or harassed?" "No." Sanderson shook her head and explained, "Tamara is just a cashier in a supermarket. Sometimes she really gets a little bit of laughter, but she just laughs." Once again, as a husband of Tamara, you found that people who had troubled her or often gave her attentive? "No." Sanderson shook his head. "Tamara is very direct. If you like it, you like it. If someone asks, she will give the answer on the spot, never rub." Well, Roan frowned after writing down these words. He did not find any useful clues. After thinking for a moment, he looked up and handed Sanderson a piece of paper. "Which Walmart store does Tamara work at?" Write down the address for me. Okay. After putting away the record of the inquiry, Roan walked out of the house and called Mona to confirm that the New Jersey Child Protection Department would arrive in 3 minutes. So he asked Riyadh to return to the SUV and prepared to drive to the Walmart to look for clues. At this moment, Danny suddenly sneaked out of the house while Sanderson was not paying attention and ran straight to the SUV. Roan was shocked when he saw this. He quickly opened the car door, ran out of the car, and picked up Danny. Before Roan could speak, Danny's crisp voice rang in his ears. I know where my mother went. Chapter 61 Black colleague, please read. Please collect. Roan tilted his head to look at Danny and saw that her delicate face was full of seriousness. Without waiting for Roan to ask, Danny continued crisply, when my mother was at work, a black colleague took a photo of her. It must be that black man who took my mother away. What? Hearing this, Roan looked up and looked at Riyadh, then hurriedly asked, when did that happen? I don't remember. Danny's mouth shrank and her eyes became red again. She explained in a low voice, that day, my stomach was uncomfortable. After my mother took me to the doctor, she took me to the supermarket to play. When I was playing games on the table, the black colleague of that mother hid behind the potato chips and took out a black box to take a photo of my mother. Danny's words were upside down, and Roan didn't understand the specific situation of that day, but he understood what Danny meant. There was a black man who took a secret photo of Tamara when she was working at the cash register at the supermarket front desk. Thank you, Danny, your information is very helpful to me. Seeing that Danny started crying again, Roan hurriedly comforted her in a panic. At this time, a black car slowly stopped by the roadside, and 2 middle-aged white women in uniform and a middle-aged white man in police uniform got out of the car. Hello, you should be Agent Roan. One of the white women saw the little blonde girl being held in the arms of the fully armed Roan, and there was an even stronger and more armed man standing beside her. The corner of her mouth twitched, but she still stretched out her hand and said, my name is Anna, from the Child Protection Department of New Jersey. Hello, just call me Roan. He stretched out his hand and shook hands with the other party. Roan took the other party's ID and looked at it carefully. After confirming that there was no problem, he handed Danny to the other party. At the same time, he pointed to the red bungalow next to him and briefly introduced Sanderson's experience and current situation. After listening to Roan's narration, Anna nodded and said in a deep voice, don't worry, we will take good care of Danny and supervise Sanderson at all times. Only when Sanderson changes his drinking habit and regains the ability to take care of Danny, we will return Danny to him. Thank you for your hard work. After shaking hands with the other party again, Roan chatted with the other party briefly. Just as he turned around and was about to leave, Danny suddenly called him and stuffed a little hairpin into Roan's hand. Luo An, this is a hairpin my mother bought for me. Danny looked at Luo An with a twitch, holding Luo An's hand tightly, her delicate little face full of pleading. You must catch the bad guy who hurt my mother, please. I promise you, Danny. With a sigh, Luo An stuffed the hairpin into his chest pocket in front of Danny, then patted her little head, and agreed in a deep voice, I will definitely catch him. The dark SUV drove forward. Luo An sat in the passenger seat. He saw Danny through the rearview mirror, who was still staring at this place reluctantly, and his face looked a little bad. As the FBI, you will see a lot of this kind of thing in the future. Riyadh, who was driving, took out a piece of chewing gum from somewhere, handed it to Roan, put a piece in his own mouth, and said while chewing, you'll get used to it. Without saying a word, Roan took the chewing gum and put it in his mouth. He looked at the information he had just received from Sanderson, was silent for a few seconds, took out his phone and called Mona. Mona, check if there are any black employees in the Walmart in the *** area. The crackling sound of a computer rang out on the other end of the phone. After a moment, Mona replied, the salary payment records of this supermarket show that they have 2 black employees. One of them is 56 years old and is a security guard and is still at work. The other is 28 years old, named John, who is a worker responsible for moving goods. He was kicked out of the supermarket 3 weeks ago for stealing. Okay. Roan nodded, motioned for Mona to send him the home address and workplace of the second black man, and then hung up the phone. Reading the home address in the phone to Riyadh, Roan continued to look through the information in his hand. Let's check that Yon first. His current workplace is a car repair shop, which happens to be on the way to the supermarket. Okay. Riyadh nodded, stepped on the accelerator, and turned the steering wheel, and the black SUV instantly drove in another direction. Yon has been with me for 2 weeks. He works very hard and nothing has been lost here. The owner of the car repair shop was an older black man. After learning about Roan and Riyadh's purpose, he did not refuse and took them directly to find Yon, while constantly praising Yon for being a good guy. Regarding Yon's previous dismissal from the supermarket for stealing, the black boss sneered and said directly, in that supermarket, the guys who work with Yon are all white. They don't like Yon, a black man who moves more things than them, and gets more money than them. Roan and Riyadh looked at each other and said nothing. John, someone's looking for you. Coming. Hearing the boss calling him, a black man with thick lips answered, slowly crawled out from under the car, and appeared in front of Roan and Riyadh. Without waiting for Roan and Riyadh to speak, the black man Yon raised his hands without saying a word. After seeing their equipment, I don't know why you came to me, but I must make one thing clear first. I have no weapons on me, and you must not accidentally discharge your guns. Point okay. Seeing the other party's movements so skillful, Roan's mouth twitched, and then he didn't waste any words and asked directly, hello, Yon, do you still remember Tamara? Yeah, the cashier at Wall Supermarket, I remember her. Yon nodded and slowly got up from the ground. Roan continued, she is missing. Some people said that you had taken a secret photo of her before she disappeared. No. Fouquet. Hearing Roan's words, Yon's face changed, and he cursed a few times, and then hurriedly explained, bro, this must have been said to you by the manager of Wall Supermarket. I tell you, this is absolutely a false accusation. A few weeks ago, when I was moving things in the supermarket warehouse, I saw 2 people interacting with the ingredients in the corner of the warehouse, so I immediately walked over and scolded them. When I walked over, I saw that the 2 people were actually the supermarket manager and his wife. So the next day, the supermarket manager accused me of stealing in the supermarket and fired me. Okay. Looking at Yon calmly, Luo An did not dwell on this issue, but continued to ask, when you were working in the supermarket, did you see some people hanging around Tamara, or did anyone harass her before she disappeared? I'm sorry, I really didn't notice this. Yon rubbed his greasy hands on his work clothes casually and explained, you know, my job at the time was to move things in the supermarket warehouse, and I basically didn't go to the supermarket front desk, so I just knew that Tamara existed, but I didn't know much about her life and work. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62 Lies. Please read. Please recommend. Okay. Riyadh nodded in agreement with what Yon said. Roan raised his eyebrows and pointed to the scars on Yon's elbow and asked, what's wrong with your elbow? Yon was stunned, then looked down at his right elbow with blood scabs and scars that had not yet fully recovered. He raised his head and said with a relaxed expression, it was scratched by Nurse Lucia's cat. Her car broke down a few days ago, and when she drove here for me to repair, I didn't notice that there was a cat on the passenger seat of the car, so I was accidentally scratched by it. At this point, a white car happened to stop in front of the repair shop. Yon's mouth twitched, and he cursed in a low voice, but still pointed at the driver of the white car and said, it's her, she is Lucia, a nurse at the nearby Mariah Hospital. Roan and Riyadh looked in the direction Yon pointed, and saw a sturdy white woman struggling to walk out of the driver's seat of the car, and then shouted to the repair shop with full energy, boss, fix the car. Seeing the sturdy figure of Nurse Lucia, Riyadh didn't react, but Roan's mouth twitched, and a picture instantly appeared in his mind, a Russian woman carrying wood. I'll be there soon. After shouting casually, Yon turned to look at Roan and Riyadh and shrugged, if there's nothing else, I'll go to work first. I'm afraid my boss will scold me after you leave. Riyadh was about to nod in agreement, but Roan shook his head and said, no, Yon, you can't leave. You didn't tell us the truth. What? Hearing this, Yeon's heart skipped a beat, and he was stunned for a moment, and then his face was full of dissatisfaction. Facing Riyadh's puzzled look, Roan raised his right hand and put his elbow in front of his neck. He stared at John and explained, only when you use your elbow to strangle someone's neck, when the other person struggles, will the arm of the strangler leave scars like the ones on your arm. So, John, answer me, what's the matter with the wound on your arm? Are you sure it was scratched by a cat? What kind of cat can scratch 6 short horizontal wounds? After listening to Roan's explanation, Riyadh finally reacted, so he quickly turned his gaze to John and subconsciously put his hand on the gun at his waist. What nonsense are you talking about? Hearing Roan's words, Yeon was shocked. Seeing Riyadh's actions, his heart sank, but he shouted angrily, I've already told you that these wounds were scratched by a cat. Do you think I'm lying because I'm black? Damn it. It has nothing to do with your skin color. You are just lying. Roan tilted his head to look at Nurse Lucia, who was not sure what was going on, but subconsciously leaned to the side and asked seriously, Nurse Lucia, hello, I'm Agent Roan from the FBI. Yeon said that the wound on his arm was scratched by your cat. Is that true? Hearing Roan's question, Lucia was stunned. Just as she was about to answer, Yeon's face changed drastically. He decisively rushed towards Riyadh, stretched out his hands, and his target was the pistol on Riyadh's waist. Bang! A gunshot rang out, and Yeon collapsed to the ground, wailing while holding his right hand. Riyadh also noticed Yeon's action, but took a step back, before preparing to draw his gun and shoot. He turned to look at Roan with a solemn expression. He didn't expect Roan to be so quick. Calmly putting away the Glock 18, Roan gave Riyadh a look, indicating that he should handcuff Yeon, and then said indifferently, according to federal law, lying to the FBI is a felony. Trying to snatch an FBI agent's gun is even more of a felony. Congratulations, Yeon, you got a prison package. I hope you have a good time in there. Shit, you son of a bitch. Yeon, who was handcuffed by Riyadh, lay on the ground and cursed, with no regrets at all. Roan kicked him unconscious, signaled Riyadh to lock him in the car, and then took out his Nokia and made a call. Half an hour later, Lassie and several SWAT team members took Yeon back to the FBI New York branch headquarters, and Roan and Riyadh went to Yeon's home. On the way, thinking of what Riyadh had said to Roan after a long silence, thank you, Roan. It's okay. Roan, who was sitting in the passenger seat, replied casually. His attention was still on the victim-related information in his hand. After hearing Riyadh's words, he asked casually, Riyadh, do you think that Yeon could be the murderer of this serial murder case? Impossible. Hearing Roan's question, Riyadh, who was driving, answered decisively, this Yeon may have killed people, but he is definitely not the serial killer in this case. Oh. Why? Roan looked up and looked at Riyadh with interest, not understanding why he was so sure. He remembered that Riyadh didn't seem to have any research on analyzing the case, and only followed orders. As for analyzing criminal psychology, Riyadh knew nothing about it. It's very simple, Roan. Ryder, who was driving, grinned. I've heard a wild theory before. That is, 90% of serial killers in the United States are white. I don't believe that we are so lucky to meet a black serial killer. Roan. Yeon's home is not far from the repair shop. It is a brown bungalow that looks a bit shabby. The black SUV slowly stopped across the street. Roan and Ryder got out of the car, stepped over the shabby fence gate that was almost useless, and went directly into the yard. The two held Glocks in their hands, bent over and stood at the door of the house, one on the left and one on the right. After counting down to 3, Ryder kicked the door open and rushed in. FBI. Roan shouted slogans, while constantly searching each room in the house. Safe. Safe. The two checked the bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, etc., and after finding no signs of anyone, Roan and Ryder returned to the living room of the room. Riyadh casually took out a small bag of white flour from under the coffee table in the living room, curled his lips, and threw it aside, then turned around and asked, do you want to call the trace inspection team? No need for now. Luo An shook his head and rejected Riyadh's suggestion, then frowned and scanned the room, even measuring the width of the bedroom and the living room step by step. What's wrong? Riyadh was a little confused. The size of this house is wrong, have you noticed? Luo An walked around the kitchen and the living room, then pushed open the door and walked outside the house, stroking his chin to observe the size of the whole house. Riyad also understood something after hearing this, but he didn't find anything. After carefully observing for a while, Luo An walked to the kitchen and decisively pulled the entire refrigerator away from its original place. A small door half a person's height appeared behind the refrigerator. Well done, Luo An. Carefully pushed the small door open, and behind it was a downward staircase that was more than 1 person wide and bottomless. This staircase occupied a small distance in the house. Perhaps it was because Roan's voice was different from John's voice in the past. A weak female voice came from the bottom of the dark stairs. Help. Chapter 63. Little St. Phil's Church. Please read. Please collect. Going down the stairs, there is a small basement. Under the dim light, a wooden single bed is placed in the corner. 4 ropes thicker than fingers are tied to the 4 legs of the bed at one end, and the other end is tied to the white woman lying on the bed. In another corner of the basement, there is a shabby desk with a small bag of flour and several used syringes on it. Hearing that the voice of the person coming this time is different, the woman barely opened her eyes and whispered for help with her cracked lips. Help. In the living room of the house, Riyad was searching the house carefully. Roan called the nearest hospital and asked them to send an ambulance here, then walked back to the sofa and poured a glass of water for the woman who was simply wearing a shirt and pants. Seeing that the other party's listless state had improved a little, Roan whispered to the woman what happened. My name is Hallie. After drinking the water, the woman grabbed a half piece of bread that had been left on the table in the living room and started eating it. While eating, she said, I work at a gym and Elite. When I don't have money to pay back my bank loan at the end of each month, I come to this area to work part-time to make money. Elite is also part of New Jersey, located in the south of Northville, about a 20-minute drive from Northville. As for the part-time job that Hallie mentioned, Luo An frowned slightly when he thought of the women wearing cool clothes on the roadside when he came by car. He didn't say anything, but poured some more water into the cup. After Hallie finished speaking while eating bread, he didn't see any contempt on Luo An's face from the corner of his eye, and he breathed a sigh of relief. After asking about today's date, Hallie continued, 4 nights ago, when I came here to work part-time, I met this black guy named John. I didn't want to serve black people, but this black guy was willing to pay a third of the price at that time, and it was still daytime, so I agreed. During the service that day, this black guy strangled my neck with his right hand from behind and knocked me out. When I woke up, I found myself locked down, and this black guy was going to inject flour into me, saying that he would sell me in a few days. Roan pretended not to hear some minor flaws in Hallie's words. Just as he was about to continue asking some questions, Riyad suddenly walked out of the bedroom next to him, holding a white t-shirt in his hand. Shaking the t-shirt open, Riyad pointed to the signature on the lower right corner of the shirt and said, Roan, this is the shirt of Ricardo from the Hyena Gang. Hearing this, Roan was stunned. What is the Hyena Gang? Who is Ricardo? The Hyena Gang is a white gang in the basic area of New Jersey. Seeing the confusion on Roan's face, Riyad explained, the gang is not big, but it is involved in industries such as flour, guns, and prostitutes. It is one of the newly emerging forces in New Jersey in recent years. And this Ricardo is also one of the grooms in the Hyena Gang, who is responsible for managing prostitutes. Okay. Roan didn't know much about gangs in the United States, but he was clear about the basic rule, that blacks mixed with blacks and whites mixed with whites. So he asked, how could a black man like John be related to a white gang? Obviously, John is a part-time groom, and Ricardo only cares about the skin color of the prostitutes, not the skin color of the grooms. Hearing Roan's question, Riyad glanced at Hallie on the sofa and explained, especially the Hyena Gang is very short of prostitutes recently. As an emerging gang, the Hyena Gang is in an expansion period to grab territory. At this time, they urgently need a large number of prostitutes to make money for themselves. But prostitutes are not always available, and grooms cannot conjure people out of thin air, so the grooms of the Hyena Gang coaxed women into going to the water while buying prostitutes from grooms in society. Ivan didn't know where he heard about this. It happened that he was fired from the supermarket some time ago and was short of money, so he decided to take a part-time job temporarily and set his sights on the new faces that appeared alone in this area and had never been seen before. These women usually don't have grooms behind them, and most of them are part-time. When they work part-time, they will not tell others what they are doing, but will sneak to other areas and go out to work. This gives Iron a great opportunity because he doesn't have to worry that someone will call the police immediately after he kidnaps such women, or that other grooms will come to beat him up immediately. Promising a high price to trick women into his home, Iron locked them up, used a small amount of flour to control them day by day, and finally sold them to Ricardo of the Hyena Gang. As for the cost of controlling women with flour, as a black man, Yon can always get cheap low quality flour with impurities. As long as the women are not poisoned to death and addicted within a few days, Yon will not lose money. Seeing Hallie sitting on the sofa yawning, runny nose, and spirits sluggish again, Roan sighed. Riyadh turned around and continued to search the house. Calling the hospital again to urge the ambulance, Roan took out the folder of the serial murder case, took out a few photos, and handed them to Hallie, asking, "Do you know these people?" Hallie opened her eyes and looked at them, shaking her head. "I haven't seen them, I don't know them." Roan frowned slightly, but didn't say much. He was just trying to get by. If there was information, it would be the best, but if there was no information, it would be fine. Ding ding. A few minutes later, the ambulance finally arrived. Roan saw several nurses getting off the ambulance, and his mouth twitched. One of them was a sturdy nurse, Lucia. He seemed to understand why the ambulance came so slowly. "Good afternoon, Agent Roan." Nurse Lucia casually picked up Hallie from the sofa and put her on the cart, waved to her colleagues to push her back into the ambulance, then turned to Roan, gave him a big smile, and asked, "Thank you for protecting me before. Can you give me your phone number? I would like to treat you to a meal. It is my responsibility to protect federal citizens." Roan's heart tightened, and he quickly changed the subject. He took out the photos of the 4 victims of the serial murder case and handed them to Lucia and asked, "By the way, do you know or have seen these people?" When Roan opened fire in the repair shop before, Lucia decisively hid in the lounge of the repair shop and never came out. Roan was busy making phone calls and had no time to ask her. "Let me see." Lucia took the photo, frowned after looking at it for a while, and pointed to the first victim, Linda Chipo, and said, "I seem to have seen her in the hospital, but I can't remember clearly." Hearing this, Roan raised his eyebrows and was about to ask, but Lucia turned around and strode towards the ambulance, slapped the window of the driver's seat and shouted, "Tom, do you recognize this woman?" Roan opened his mouth and didn't know what to say. Tom, who was in charge of driving the ambulance, cursed in a low voice, then took the photo handed to him by Lucia. "I know her. Her name should be Linda." After a few seconds, Tom nodded and explained to Roan beside him, "I forgot her husband's name, but I happened to be there when she got married in Little St. Phil's Church a year ago. Because someone disrupted the wedding, it lasted for a long time. I remember it very clearly. Yes, that's right, it's Little St. Phil's Church, not the hospital." Hearing Tom's words, Lucia clapped her hands and said happily, "When the new Liwats get married in Little St. Phil's Church, there will be a donation activity, which means that some food is provided to passers-by for free. I also went to that wedding and ate several big cakes." Roan raised his eyebrows when he heard this and hurriedly handed the photos of the other 3 victims to Tom, asking, "Do you know these 3 people?" Tom took the photo, looked at it carefully, and then pointed to the photo of Tamara Terry and said in a deep voice, "And her, 8 or 9 years ago, I don't remember the exact time. But she also held her wedding in Little St. Phil's Church. At that time, I had no money, and I often went to Little St. Phil's Church to participate in donation activities. Thanks to the recommendation votes of book friends such as Seeing Myself Get Angry, Princess Green Bean, AI Hua, Carrot, Tattoo, A Smile and Pass 483, The Last Alchemist, Feng Looming, There Are Lazy People, Demon Neighbors, Not Smoky Rain Like Pictures, Lingnan Lone Wolf, One Winds, Chatting Without Knowing, Questman, Ardan AJT, Non-Alcoholic Beer, Underwater Doll. Cheyenne Tan Lang, Lingshan Square, etc. Thank you all for your support. Thank you all. Chapter 64D. Please read. Please recommend. Office Area of Investigation Team Number 5. The sound of keyboards clacking rang out for a long time. Mona tilted her head and said to Roan beside her, "You guessed right, Roan. The 4 victims of the State Lake corpse case, Linda Chapo, Beatrice Leon, Natalie Carliel and Tamara Terry, all held their weddings at the Little St. Phil Church in Gloucester, New Jersey." Okay. Roan nodded when he heard this. Ryder beside him came over, looked at it for a few seconds and asked, "Is it related to this serial murder?" "High probability." Roan nodded and explained. The 4 victims' home addresses, living and working environments, social environments, etc. are all unrelated, and even their appearances do not have uniform features, such as blonde or red hair. The only connection is that they are all married women. So now it is found that several victims held weddings in the same church. It is absolutely impossible to say that there is no connection between them. Mona continued to retrieve the list of couples who held weddings in the church in recent years, and then said, "Before the wedding, the church administrators will ask the newlyweds to fill out their personal information, such as name, home address, place of work, etc. According to the church administrators, unless the newlyweds come back to ask for this information will be kept in the church in paper form and only processed once every few years. The murderer can use that information to find the victim." It seems that this is where the murderer identified his target. After hearing what Mona said, Lassie, who was hugging her waist, nodded. Roan glanced at Lassie and asked Mona in a deep voice, "Can you tell me who has access to the personal information of these newlyweds? I'm afraid we need to go to the Little St. Phil Church to investigate." Mona spread her hands, her face speechless. According to common sense, only the church administrators can access that information. But according to the couples who have held weddings in this church, except for the front hall, which is clean, spacious and bright, the other areas of this church are actually very simple. Because there are nothing valuable, there are no cameras installed in the corridors, and the small rooms are not locked. The security is just an old priest. If someone wants to enter the church to steal information, they can do it without attracting anyone's attention. Okay. Seeing the photo of the newlyweds getting married, because there was a dedication activity, so a group of people were eating for free in the small square outside the church. Roan rubbed his temples, and after a long silence, he said, "How about this, Lassie? You and Ryder go to the Little St. Phil Church, and bring back the names of all the couples who have held weddings here in the past 10 years. I'm afraid we have to compare them one by one." "What?" Hearing Roan's words, Ryder didn't react. Lassie, who was stroking Mona's slender waist, jumped up on the spot and asked with a puzzled look on her face, "Why do we need such old information? Can't we just check whether the manager in the church had an alibi when the 4 victims disappeared?" "We will check this, but not now." Seeing the puzzled looks of Lassie, Ryder and Mona, Roan's mouth twitched, and he coughed lightly and explained. "First, among the 4 victims, Molla Terry got married 8 years ago, but died 2 weeks ago. We can't be sure if there is any connection between them. Second, according to the forensic report, it is obviously not the first time for the murderer to commit a crime. So we need to check these couples in the church to see if there are any missing cases before, and then find a way to find the bodies, or find the connection between the victims. The more times the murderer commits crimes, the more things will be exposed, especially his previous crimes, which will definitely provide us, the FBI, with a lot of evidence to find his true identity. Third, nothing related to the murderer was detected on the bodies of the 4 victims. Even if the church administrator did not have an alibi, it would be useless, because we could not link him to the victims without evidence. So while we are investigating the church administrator, we must also find the crimes the murderer had committed before, and then find more evidence to nail the real murderer. After listening to Luo An's orderly narration, Lassie and Reed suddenly realized, nodded, and decisively turned around and left the office area. Mona looked at the computer and pondered for a moment, tilting her head and asking, "But when the couple got married in the church, there were so many passers-by who came to eat and drink for free because of the dedication event. What should we do with these people? We can't rule out their suspicion. Roan glanced at Mona and was about to answer when Augustus suddenly walked into the office area with 2 white agents in suits and shouted, "Roan, come to the conference room." "Okay, sir." Patting Mona on the shoulder, Roan asked her to log into the FBI database and check the cases in the Little St. Phil Church area, focusing on homicides, rapes and stalking, and then walked into the conference room. As soon as they entered the conference room and closed the door of the conference room, Augustus pointed to the 2 white agents and introduced them to Roan. "The one on the left is Special Investigation Agent Norton from our FBI Organized Crime Division. The one on the right is Special Investigation Agent Mullen from the D. The FBI's Organized Crime Division mainly focuses on gangs. D, or Drug Enforcement Administration, means the US Drug Enforcement Administration. Its main work direction is to combat illegal flower trade and use in the United States. Attention. It's illegal flower. Legal flower is not important. Hello, just call me Roan." Roan raised his eyebrows, stretched out his hand and shook hands with the 2 agents, then tilted his head and asked, "I wonder what you 2 want to see me about today." "Hello, Agent Roan." The special investigation agents of the 2 departments looked at each other, and Norton from the Organized Crime Division of the FBI explained, "It's like this. Our 2 departments have been investigating the Hyena gang for the past year and want to send the gang's boss Luo An to prison. In short, the black man named Yon arrested by Roan today after the joint memory recovery surgery of the FBI and D said some clues that were not important to Yon, but very important to the D and FBI. So the 2 agents came here today to express their gratitude to Agent Roan of the 5th Investigation Team." Seeing the $1,000 check handed over by the other party, Luo An raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect that he could get money by catching a black man at random. There are so many black people on the street. Glancing at Augustus, who was beside him with a big belly and a big black face, Luo An quickly threw the thoughts in his mind aside. "Thank you." Luo An took the check and said thank you politely. At this moment, he saw that the agent Mullen coughed and was about to speak. Luo An's eyes flashed, and he immediately put the check in his pocket, then grabbed the hands of the 2 agents and shook them, with a warm smile on his face. "As an FBI agent, I have always admired the work of your 2 departments. As long as you need it, in addition to being an undercover, assassinating gang leaders, eavesdropping on gang information, installing eavesdropping devices, secretly recording videos, seducing the wives of gang bosses and other high-risk jobs, I will definitely help you with other things. Believe me, I'm very good at solving cases. Mullen. Norton. Thank you for the support of all book friends. Please read. Please collect. Chapter 65 Undercover. Please read. Please collect." Leaving the office of the 5th Investigation Team and walking in the corridor outside, the Special Investigator Mullen looked gloomy. After hesitating for a moment, he looked back and saw Augustus hugging Roan's shoulders and laughing, and his mouth corners turned down immediately. "I said it before, Merrin." Seeing the look on his friend's face, Agent Norton from the FBI's Organized Crime Division patted him on the shoulder and smiled. Although Roan has only been promoted from a trainee agent to a full-time agent for less than a week, he has already solved a serial murder and dismemberment case. He is not one of those foolish guys who were willing to go undercover in the gang after being fooled by you. Hey, Norton, being an undercover is not stupid, okay? Hearing Norton's words, Merrin was immediately unhappy. Just as he was about to explain, Norton spread his hands and asked, "How many of the people you sent to be undercover successfully came back alive? How long did they do undercover? After finishing their undercover work, did they get a promotion when they came back? Did they get a bonus after they came back? The way your sends people undercover is too rough. Roan Greenwood is a promising FBI agent. I told you before that he would never agree to let you do this kind of job." Without waiting for Mullen to answer, Norton chuckled, patted him on the shoulder, and strode into the elevator. The work content of the FBI's Organized Crime Department is also gangsters. Although I don't know the full picture of the D's undercover success rate data, I can guess it roughly. Anyway, it's not high. With a cold snort, Mullen stopped talking nonsense, glanced coldly at the area of investigation team number 5, and strode into the elevator. Well done, Roan. At the door of the number 5 investigation team, seeing Norton and Mullen entering the elevator, Augustus patted Roan's shoulder, laughed with satisfaction and nodded repeatedly. When you took the check just now, I was going to warn you, but I didn't expect you to see through the D's idea. Not bad. You have a brain and are smart. Thank you, sir. Roan chuckled and didn't say much. As a killer, the most important thing is to trust your instincts. When he first met Agent Mullen before, Roan felt that the other party made him feel uncomfortable. He originally thought that something had happened to the black man John, or that he had said something he shouldn't have said, and that Mullen was looking for trouble, but he didn't expect that the other party was here to deliver a check. However, after receiving the check, Mullen still made him feel uncomfortable. Thinking of the content of the D's work, Luo An easily guessed the other party's purpose. It is very likely that he was pulled to do undercover. Of course, considering that he had already been on TV in New York, the undercover location should not be New York. The D's work scope is the entire Federation, and changing to another city, such as Chicago, or even a little further south, is still no problem. After all, people there don't read the New York Daily. Regarding the work of being an undercover, Luo An only had one word in his mind. Haha. The work of undercover is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. If you want to survive to the end, brains, strength, luck, and reliable superiors are indispensable. Without one of them, you will find yourself sinking to the bottom of the Hudson River when you wake up. Luo An looked down at himself. He has money, looks, and a future. Why should he do such a thankless job? And it's not an FBI job. So just now he decisively shut the other person up with words. Thank you for your check. If you need it in the future, I will provide you with all support except help. The two walked back to the office area of the number 5 investigation team. Augustus tilted his head and asked, how is it, Lake female corpse serial murder case? A little bit. Luo An nodded and told Augustus that he had found a connection between the 4 victims, that is, the experience of getting married in the Little St. Phil church, and then said, next, I'm going to check the list of new Liwats who got married in that church to see if I can find new victims, so as to find more information about the murderer. Okay. Augustus didn't say much about Luo An's idea. He nodded affirmatively and said that, if he needed support, he would send a message immediately, and then turn to Verinus's office. It is said that Verinus has something to ask him. Sitting back at her workstation, Mona, who was sitting next to her, was dancing on the keyboard with her 10 fingers. When she saw Luo An coming back, she stopped what she was doing, pointed at the computer, and tilted her head with an unhappy look on her face. One good news, and one bad news. Luo An, which one do you want to hear? Luo An paused and said speechlessly, let me tell you the bad news first. Mona curled her lips and pointed at the computer and said, the bad news is that, if you ask me to investigate murders, rapes, stalking, indecent assaults and other cases centered on Little St. Phil's Church, I simply can't investigate them all. The area is too large, and there are countless cases. There are more than a dozen murders that the New Jersey police have not solved. These are still reported. Some people died on the streets. After the New Jersey police sent people to clean up the bodies, they didn't come to any conclusions. Luo An's face was full of black lines when he heard Mona's words. It is worthy of being America, where an average of 120 people die from gunshots every day. The death of a person is really not a big deal in New York and New Jersey, two densely populated places. What about the good news? Mona pursed her lips, and after a few keystrokes, a circle appeared on the computer screen. According to your request, when I investigated the cases around Little St. Phil Church, I drew a circle with a radius of 3 miles. It turned out that the lake at the border of the state, where the bodies of the 4 victims were found, and the homes of the 4 victims, were all within this circle. What did you say? Seeing the circle on the computer, Roan's eyes widened, very surprised. But when he saw the endless list of cases in the computer, Roan's mouth twitched, and after thinking for a moment, he said, because the first victim Linda Chipo disappeared and died 8 months ago, when you search for the next case, set the time to within the past year. At the same time, there is no need to investigate the cases where the murderers have been arrested and are in prison. The main focus is on those who have been released from prison within a year and are currently living within a 3-mile radius of Little St. Phil Church. Okay. Hearing Roan's arrangement, Mona sighed, took a sip of bitter coffee, patted her face, and the crackling sound of the keyboard rang again. After a long time, Riyad, who was holding 2 large cardboard boxes, and Lassie, who was holding another large cardboard box, also came back. Lassie and Riyad let out a long sigh after throwing the cardboard boxes on the floor of the conference room. Thank you for your hard work. Luo An poured them a cup of coffee and began to flip through the papers that contained information about the new Liwats. Luo An, these 3 boxes only contain the information records of new Liwats in Little St. Phil's Church in the past 2.5 years. After taking a sip of coffee, Lassie sat down on the chair with a tense face. Little St. Phil's Church receives new people every week. If there are many people, we can receive 4 couples a day. If there are few people, we can receive 2 couples a day. If you really want to check all the information of new people in the past 10 years, then don't check it. The 10 people in our number 5 investigation team can't check it all. That's right. Riyad on the side nodded repeatedly, put down the coffee cup and said, on the way we just went back and forth. Little St. Phil's Church received another couple of new people. Luo An frowned when he heard this. After a long silence, he suddenly slapped his head, stood up, shook the paper in his hand and said, no, we still have to check. Seeing that Lassie and Riyad's faces fell after hearing what he said, Luo An shook his head and said in a deep voice, but our next focus is to check the records of new couples in the past 7 months, and the records of new couples in the past 2 weeks. Why? Riyad perked up when he heard that, but Lassie asked doubtfully, but you said before that Meriteri got married 8 years ago, but died 2 weeks ago. This, thanks to Yao, not the painting of Misty Rain, Mizadori Michiru, haha, incomplete pages, Ziokan, Free and Easy Fox, Feng Yang Gaiu, et al.'s, A Smile and Pass 483, La 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 Big Monster, Demon Neighbor, Plant a Star, Dream of 6+1, incomplete pages, Yellow KCO, Non-Alcoholic Beer, Wind Chaser, TSG, N, Book C Navigation and other book friends for their recommendations. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 66 Case Investigation Direction. Please read. Please recommend. Yes, I did say that before. Luo An nodded, then shook his head and said, but I found that simply looking for the victim's wedding time is probably useless. We still have to start with the murderer. Lassie and Riyad walked out of the conference room with question marks on their faces. Luo An took out the folder of the victim's information file at his workstation. He called Mona, who was still typing on the keyboard, to come over. Luo An took out a pen and drew a big circle on the disappearance time of the 4 victims. Look carefully. Luo An placed the file folder in front of the 3 people and said in a deep voice, it suddenly occurred to me just now that the first victim disappeared 8 months ago, which is about 32 weeks ago, if converted into weeks. The second victim disappeared 2 months ago, which is about 8 weeks ago, if converted into weeks. The third victim disappeared a month ago, which is about 4 weeks ago, if converted into weeks. The fourth victim disappeared 2 weeks ago. Of course, this time is when the case was handed over to our investigator number 5, not today. Holy shit. Fouquet. Seeing the numbers Luo An wrote on the file, Lassie and Riyad cursed in unison, and Mona's eyes lit up and she shouted, geometric sequence? Not equal. Ignoring his subconscious words, Luo An nodded at Mona and said, it could be a geometric sequence, but there is a missing 16 in the middle. We can boldly speculate that there should have been another victim about 4 months ago, but no one has found her body yet. Or New Jersey's police have discovered her body, but the body was attributed to other cases by the police. Column, not 100%. Luo An shook his head and said, from another perspective, 2R are 4, 4 are 8, then which 2 are added up? 1. Well, to the front of the office area of the 5th investigation team, Luo An took a whiteboard, wiped out all the things written on it, and then began to write carefully. In the dignified eyes of the clue and analysis of the currently obtained by the agent of the number 5 investigation team. After a light cough, he was about to introduce everyone when Augustus and Verena suddenly walked in. Sir. Verinus waved her hand and saw that all the detectives of the number 5 investigation team were surrounding Luo An. She asked coldly, "What happened?" "Nothing. I'm just going to analyze the case with everyone." Luo An threw the pen in his hand aside, looked at Verinus, and asked with a smile, "Sir, do you have any new tasks for us?" Without answering Luo An's question, Verinus walked to the whiteboard, looked at it carefully for a moment, tilted her head and asked, "The serial murder case of female corpses in the lake." Luo An, who was winking at Augustus and asking Verinus why she came to the number 5 investigation team, heard Verinus's cold voice and immediately replied, "Yes, it's this case. I just got some new clues, and I'm going to discuss it with everyone." Verinus nodded, without saying much, pulled over an agent's chair, and sat down with her legs crossed. "Go on." Point okay. Seeing that Augustus also pulled a chair and sat next to Verinus without telling him anything, Luo An licked the corner of his mouth, didn't care, picked up the pen, and started to introduce. Click, the whiteboard marker tapped on the upper left corner. Roan pointed to the PPT and the information on the whiteboard and said, "The first victim, Linda Chapeau, was married and 28 years old. The second victim, Beatrice Lian, was married and 34 years old. The third victim, Natalie Khalil, was married and 25 years old. The fourth victim, Tamara Terry, was married and 30 years old." When the case was first handed over to the 5th investigation team, we only found the following similarities between the victims. First, they were all married women. Second, after the murderer kidnapped the victims, he tortured them for a period of time, causing bruises on their upper bodies and lacerations on their lower bodies. Third, the murderer killed them by strangling them directly with a rope. Fourth, after killing them, the murderer took the rings from the victims' hands. Hearing Roan's narration, Monalise and other detectives became more focused. Augustus nodded with satisfaction. Verinus switched her legs up and down, pursed her lips slightly, and did not speak. Because the bodies of the victims were soaked in the lake for too long, the forensic doctor could not find the murderer's DNA, and the information on it could not determine the murderer's identity, so we launched a follow-up investigation. Luo An took a whiteboard marker and tapped the words in the center of the whiteboard and said solemnly, "During the investigation, we found new connections between the victims. First, the church where the 4 victims got married was the same, the Little St. Phil Church. Second, with the Little St. Phil Church as the center, draw a circle with a radius of 3 miles. The lake where the bodies were found and the homes of the 4 victims are all within this circle. Third, the time when the 4 victims disappeared, that is, the time when the murderer committed the crime, converted into weeks, was 32 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, and 2 weeks ago, respectively. There is a missing 16, which is suspected to be a geometric sequence." Hearing this, Mona and Lassie, who was holding her slender waist, did not change their expressions. Ryder took another sip of the bitter coffee. The other detectives looked solemn. Augustus opened his mouth to ask questions, but when he saw Verinus beside him, he fell silent again. Verinus looked at the words on the whiteboard. Her eyes narrowed, and after thinking for a moment, she asked, "What are you going to do next?" Roan glanced at Verinus, his expression unchanged, and pointed to the words on the upper right corner of the whiteboard with a whiteboard marker, and said in a deep voice, "First, Agents Lassie and Riyadh have retrieved the list of new liwats in Little St. Phil's Church in the past 2.5 years. Secondly, according to the information, the first victim, Linda Chapeau, got married 11 months ago and disappeared 8 months ago. The second victim, Beatrice Lian, got married 5 months ago and disappeared 2 months ago. The third victim, Natalie Khalil, got married 4 months ago and disappeared a month ago. Except for the fourth victim, Tamara Terry, who got married 8 years ago but disappeared 2 weeks ago. All the others were abducted by the murderer in the 3rd month after their marriage. So there are 4 things we need to do next. First, carefully check the people in Little St. Phil's Church. This case cannot be unrelated to them. Second, focus on checking the couples who got married at Little St. Phil Church 3 months ago and currently live in the circle, and check if any of these couples have gone missing this week. Leave our contact information during the investigation, so that if a case occurs later, the victim's family can contact us in time. Third, check the couples who got married at St. Phil Church 3 months ago, that is, 7 months ago, and lived in the circle within 4 months after marriage, to see if any of them have gone missing. If there is such a case, then we may be able to find traces of the murderer and catch the murderer. Fourth, check the criminals who live near Little St. Phil Church in the circle, who have been imprisoned for rape, stalking, indecent assault, etc., but have just been released from prison in the past year. Because the forensic report shows that the murderer is not the first time to kill, and the crimes are gradually escalating, these people are also very suspicious. At this point, Luo An turned around and said to everyone with a serious expression, the more the murderer does, the greater the chance of making mistakes, and the higher the chance of us catching the other party. I believe that, as long as all the detectives of our number 5 investigation team work together, we will definitely catch this murderer. Good. That's right. Well done. After listening to Luo An's analysis, the detectives of the number 5 investigation team were encouraged and applauded. Augustus also stood up from his chair and slapped Luo An on the shoulder. After a few grins, he turned back to look at the detectives and shouted, "Now, everyone, check the people Luo An just mentioned. Let's throw the murderer into jail as quickly as possible." The detectives took the information of the new liwats in the large cardboard box, ran back to their workstations, and started working. Veronis's expression did not change, but she was also very satisfied in her heart. She stood up from her chair and walked towards Augustus's team leader's office. When passing by Luo An, Veronis said to Luo An in a cold voice, "Come in, Luo An. Thanks to Jlie, Yunlong brother, Shanhu, Adan AJT and other book friends for their awards, and thank you all for your support. Chapter 67 Bank Robbery, please read. Please collect." Following Veronis into the team leader's office, the two sat down. Bruce An has a bank robbery case. Without further ado, Veronis sat on the chair, crossed her legs, and looked at Luo An, and said coldly, "But 3 days have passed, and not only has Bruce An not found the robbers, he also doesn't know the robbers' identities. Even when he was tracking down the robbers deceived him again, and robbed another bank." Puff. Hearing this news, Luo An couldn't help but laughed out loud. Seeing this, Veronis also raised the corner of her mouth slightly, but quickly suppressed her emotions, restored her expressionless look, and continued, "This matter is now a big deal. The top management of the bank is very dissatisfied, and my superiors are also dissatisfied. At the meeting a few hours ago, Bruce An was forced to set a deadline for solving the case. Today does not count, the next 3 days. If he fails to solve the case and catch the robbers in the next 3 days, then Bruce An will be removed from his position as team leader and transferred out of the FBI New York branch building." Hearing the punishment for failing to solve the case, the smile on Luo An's face paused. It was a good thing that Bruce An was transferred away, and he was very happy, but Veronis told him about it. After a few seconds of silence, he looked at Veronis and asked, "What does the chief mean?" To be honest, the methods of this group of bank robbers are very clever. I think Bruce An's success rate in solving the case this time is a bit low. Seeing that Luo An reacted quickly, Veronis showed a hint of appreciation in her eyes. After a light cough, she looked at Luo An with both eyes and said coldly, "Bruce An can be transferred, but the case will not be transferred. It still needs to be solved by our FBI in New York." So after the meeting, my superior asked several of our team leaders to discuss who will take over the case if Bruce An fails. Luo An was relieved to hear that Veronis had not taken over the case yet. He thought that Veronis had come to add burdens to him because he had not solved the serial murder case in his hand. And it was a big burden that even experienced old FBI like Bruce An could not bite off. Taking a deep breath, Luo An looked at Veronis and asked seriously, "So, the commander wants to take over this case?" "Yes." Veronis nodded, looking at Luo An with her eyes. "The 5 investigation teams under my command, the number 1 investigation team's case solving level has dropped a lot because of Bruce's departure. The case solving level of the number 2, 3, and 4 investigation teams has always been average, and they have at least 3 cases in their hands, so they really can't take over this case." Veronis didn't finish her words, but Luo An already understood what she meant. The number 5 investigation team has himself and there is only one serial murder case in hand, so they can definitely take over this case. Licking the corner of his mouth with the tip of his tongue, Luo An looked up at Verinus and asked with a smile, "If the commander solves this case, then I will have the opportunity to take the next step." Verinus didn't hide it from Luo An, because Luo An was invited by her to join the Columbus Foundation, and he was one of her own, the kind of person who would prosper together. If this bank robbery is solved, Verines put away her crossed legs, leaned forward, crossed her hands on the desk, stared at Luo An, and revealed ambition in her cold tone. "I have the opportunity to go further, and you also have the opportunity to be promoted to a senior agent. At the same time, you can get a considerable amount of thank you money from the bank." Less than a month after being promoted from a trainee agent to a full-time agent, he was promoted to a senior agent. This is not an ordinary special promotion. But Luo An's face did not react. Hearing that the bank would pay a considerable amount of thank you money later, Luo An's eyelids only moved slightly. Opportunities always coexist with risks. This truth is deeply ingrained in Luo An's mind. Although Luo An does not like Bruce An, he has been able to sit in the position of the leader of the #1 investigation team for so many years. At the same time, the #1 investigation team has a case solving rate that is second to none among the 13 investigation teams. No one would believe that Bruce An has no ability to solve cases. But such a person, whose resume of solving cases is as thick as a folder, didn't catch the bank robber this time. If this case of this gang of bank robbers is handed over to me, and I can successfully solve the case and catch the murderer, then everything will be perfect. But if the case is not solved, and the murderer escapes and disappears, I'm afraid that the ending of Browson will be the same as mine. Money is indeed a good thing, but the premise of taking it is that you are safe. After a long silence, Luo An looked up at Verinus and smiled. "Sir, do you have any information about the bank robbery case? I need to study it carefully before I can make a decision." "Okay, I will have someone send it to you later." Verinus nodded and agreed to Luo An's request. "Don't worry, Luo An, you can make a decision in 3 days. I'm here today just to tell you this news." Before leaving the #5 investigation team, Verine sat on the chair in the team leader's office, looked at Luo An's profile, and said in a deep voice, "You are the real leader in the process of solving the case, so you must carefully check the situation of this case, and seriously analyze the possibility of catching the robber. If you are really not sure of solving the case, you must tell me. I have time for promotion, and you have time too." Verines has always been broad-minded and reasonable to her own people. And she is not in a hurry, she just saw the opportunity and subconsciously wanted to seize it. "Okay, thank you, sir." Luo An grinned, pushed open the door, and walked out of the team leader's office. Seeing Luo An coming out of his office, Augustus, who was looking down at Mona typing on the keyboard, his eyes lit up, and he immediately stood up and walked towards this direction. "Sir." Luo An grinned, thinking that Augustus was going to talk to him. Unexpectedly, Augustus walked past him and walked to Verinus, who was about to leave the #5 investigation team. Seeing the faint smile on Augustus's dark face towards Verinus, and hearing the faint words of salary, apology, etc., Luo An was a little confused for a moment. "Forget it, it doesn't matter." Stretching, Luo An looked around the #5 investigation team office area. Except for Ryder, all the other agents were busy using the information of the newcomers in the Little St. Phil church to check whether there was a missing wife. Luo An nodded secretly in his heart. The army's morale was available. Then it was time to get off work. As usual, everyone went home after a day's work. Ryder went home to find his wife and son. Mona took the computer back to her newly bought small apartment, and Lassie took out some cosmetics from somewhere, painted on her face, tied her white shirt up, and went straight to a bar. After sending Augustus home, Roan drove his Chevrolet aimlessly around the streets of New York, not knowing where to go. The small apartment had not yet been built, and the decoration company that Reed had found for Roan was still in the stage of drawing up the design for Roan to review. Roan found a hotel to take a nap, and saw that it was less than 6 o'clock on his watch, which seemed a little early. After thinking for a long time, Roan decided to find a gym to exercise. The body is the foundation of everything, and the previous back pain was still vivid in his mind. Roan found a gym in the Greenwich area, where the small apartment was located, parked the car, and walked in slowly. "Hi, how are you?" Seeing Luo An walking into the gym, the curvy young white female coach Della's eyes lit up, and she immediately threw the water in her hand to the ground, and stretched out her hand to Luo An. "My name is Della, I'm the coach here. Is this your first time here?" "Hello, my name is Luo An." He stretched out his hand and shook the other person's hand. Luo An looked down, and saw the other person's breathtaking appearance. The corners of his mouth turned up, and a smile appeared on his ordinary handsome face. "It's indeed my first time here. Thanks to haha, to two, Etiles, Mihu Zio Bao, and Zioyao Fox, Kiziangayan, Huang 07536445, Fengyang Gaiu, 053844.QDCN, Sangshan Mozu Neighbor, Z Modi, One Vans, Panan, Carrot, King Chengjusha, Zhang Zionan and other book friends for their recommendation votes. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 68, a new disappearance case. Please read. Please recommend. The next morning, in the Chevrolet, seeing the good reviews given by the system page and the 3 new bottles of physical potions, Luo An's mouth twitched. Silently drinking a bottle of physical potion, his aching waist instantly became full of energy. Luo An hesitated for a moment and blacklisted this gym. "It damages my essence and blood, and I will never come again." At 7:40, Luo An arrived at the parking lot under the Jacob Federal Building. After parking the Chevrolet, he saw that there was still time, turned around and went to the coffee shop opposite the building to buy a cup of ordinary coffee with sugar and milk. In my previous life, when did milk tea enter the Federation? Holding coffee and a small bag of breakfast, Luo An passed the security check on the first floor of the Jacob Federal Building, while thinking about whether to open a milk tea shop in New York to give the country bumpkins who drink hot pot water every day in the Federation a little impact from the mysterious Oriental culture. While drinking coffee, he slowly walked towards the elevator leading to the floor of the 5th investigation team. Just as the elevator door was about to close, a hand suddenly stretched out and stopped it. The elevator door slowly opened again. Luo An looked up and saw that it was Bruce and Matthews, who looked unhappy. Luo An had learned Matthews' name from William before. Seeing the two people who obviously hadn't slept all night, with red eyes and oily faces, Luo An was silent for a second, and then slowly showed a warm smile on his face. "Good morning, two officers." Luo An was always very polite. Seeing that the person in the elevator was Luo An again, after hearing Luo An's greeting, Matthews almost spit out the sun of the beach. But when he saw the officer next to him, Bruce, walking into the elevator with an expressionless face, Matthews hurriedly swallowed the words that had already run to his throat and followed Bruce into the elevator. Luo An stood at the left rear corner of the elevator with coffee and breakfast, while Bruce and Matthews stood on the right side of the elevator door, clearly separated. There was no verbal confrontation as imagined, and the elevator arrived at the floor, where the investigation team was quietly. The elevator door opened, and Bruce walked out expressionlessly, never looking at Roan, as if this person did not exist at all. Matthews cursed something in a low voice when he left the elevator, but he did not turn back to pay attention to Roan. In the corridor, Matthews caught up with Bruce, looking very unhappy. "Sir, this Roan." "No hurry." Hearing Matthews' words, Bruce had a blank expression, but the cold light in his eyes seemed to be able to freeze people to death. "Wait until he fails to solve the case before you do it." Matthews heard this and raised the corners of his mouth, sneering. "Okay, sir." On the other side, walking to the door of the number 5 investigation team, tilting his head to glance at Bruce's back, Roan took a sip of coffee. There is an old saying in the East, a dog that bites doesn't bark, with a cold light flashing in his eyes. Roan silently raised Bruce's danger level to himself by 1 level. The other parties means are nothing more than kicking someone when he is down. But to kick someone when he is down, you need a good morning, Luo An. Lassie, whose Mac disappeared again, walked out of the elevator with a tired body. After saying hello, she snatched the breakfast from Luo An's hand, swallowed it in a few mouthfuls, and then fell asleep on her desk. "Luo An. Good morning, Luo An." Luo An just sat back at his workstation, and Riyad, who was covered in lumps, came over with a bag of breakfast. "Good morning, Riyad." Luo An nodded, smiled and replied, then took the breakfast that Riyad had prepared on the desk and stuffed it into his mouth in a few mouthfuls. "Ryder. Good morning, agents. Congratulations on moving forward another day in your life." Augustus, with a big belly and a bag of breakfast, entered the number 5 investigation team on time. As soon as he entered the door, he shouted, "Today, the enemy we have to deal with is still the murderer of this serial murder case. Thank you Agent Roan for your wonderful analysis yesterday, which helped us eliminate some wrong options. Now, does any agent have any new findings?" "Yes, sir." Hearing this, William stood up with a folder and said loudly, "Before leaving get off work yesterday, I was investigating a couple who got married in Little St. Phil Church 3 months ago and currently live in the circle. I accidentally discovered a missing case reported to the New Jersey police early yesterday morning. In some parts of the United States, if the disappearance time does not exceed 24 hours, it will be classified as a missing case. The police will only record it and will not investigate. If the disappearance time exceeds 24 hours, the missing case will be upgraded to a missing case. However, the police will decide whether to file a case for investigation and how many police officers to send for the investigation based on the family situation of the missing person. All procedures are very American. HMM. Everyone was excited and all turned their eyes to William, but William immediately said, "The person who reported the missing case is indeed the husband of the new Liwats, but the missing person is not his wife, but his high school daughter." Hearing this, Augustus frowned. Although it is a bit bad to say this, but a high school girl doesn't seem to fit our habit of finding the murderer. "Indeed." William nodded. "Not only that, the girl was found by her father last night. The reason for her disappearance was that she sneaked out with her boyfriend, so the missing case was also dropped by the New Jersey police." Hearing William's words, everyone was speechless. Luo An discovered something and asked in confusion, "Is there any follow-up to the matter?" "Yes." William gave Luo An a look that said, "You know me," then picked up another folder from the table and said, "Just now I turned on the computer and saw that this husband reported another missing case to the New Jersey Police Department. The missing person this time is his new Liwat wife. According to the husband, the time of disappearance was when he went out to look for his daughter last night. Because the time of disappearance was less than 24 hours, the New Jersey police did not upgrade this disappearance to a missing case, nor did they start an investigation." At this moment, everyone's eyes changed instantly. William looked down at the couple's marriage information and said seriously, "They got married 2.5 months ago. Living near Little St. Phil's Church, in the circle. The marriage time was roughly within 3 months. The missing person was a married woman, and the time of disappearance was also at night, which met all the conditions of the previous victims. Not only that, yesterday it was also speculated that the murderer might continue to commit crimes during this period." After briefly reviewing the information in his mind, Roan decisively cast his eyes on Augustus. Augustus nodded, motioned William to sit down, and then asked loudly, "Has any other agent found new gains?" The detectives shook their heads, and Augustus immediately looked at Roan. Roan did not hesitate, and immediately took Ryder and Lassie to the equipment warehouse. After getting the equipment, the three of them got on the SUV of the number 5 investigation team. Roan stepped on the accelerator and the car roared out, "It's all your fault. If it weren't for you." In a small 2-story house in a community 2.5 miles southwest of the Little St. Phil Church, when Luo An and the other two arrived, the middle-aged white husband John O was standing on the stairs and furious, pointing at a room on the 2nd floor and cursing. Bang, 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 hello, FBI. Pushing open the door of the house that was not closed at all, Luo An took out the FBI's golden badge and showed it to Jono and asked seriously, "Mr. Jono, you reported a missing case to the New Jersey Police Department last night, right?" Someone asked the author before about the tax payment issue after the protagonist received the thank you money. The author explains here, in the United States, the fiscal year is divided according to the natural year. When filing taxes, the tax information of the previous year is reported. In short, it means that in 2023, the tax for 2022 will be paid. Of course, in the United States, when residents generate income, whether it is wages or stock speculation, as long as you have income, the company will first deduct a part of it according to the proportion, and the company will use it to pay taxes. For example, if you earn $100 a month, you only actually receive $95, and the remaining $5 is used by your company to pay taxes. Then when you file your taxes on April 15th every year, you can apply for a tax refund, because most of the time, the company deducts a lot of tax from you, so the $5 deducted from you may be returned as $2. Of course, the main content of the author's book is solving cases, and the world, as mentioned earlier, is fictional. So don't take taxes too seriously. Paying taxes is a must, but it is set to pay taxes this year for making money last year, and pay taxes next year for making money this year. How much tax should be paid on wages and bonuses will be calculated together in the second year. Otherwise, the United States has to calculate income, wages plus investments plus, etc., to pay taxes, and also calculate tax exemptions, tax credits, and tax rates. My book is about solving cases, not calculating taxes, and the author is not an accountant. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69. Poor eyesight. Please read. Please vote. FBI. Seeing the golden badge in front of him, Jono was stunned. Then he showed his joy and nodded repeatedly. Yes, my wife is missing. Just last night, Jono suddenly felt something was wrong. Why didn't the New Jersey State Police come, but the FBI? Could it be that? Thinking of this, Jono's face suddenly changed, and he asked hurriedly, Mr. Agent, how is my wife? Where is she now? Please calm down, Mr. Jono. Luo An turned around and gave Lassie a look. The other nodded, walked up the stairs, and successfully got Jono's daughter to open the door with a few words, and easily entered her daughter's room. Riyad walked out of the door and began to observe the surroundings of the apartment, trying to find some useful clues. Our goal is to find your wife. We both agree on this. Luo An motioned for Kao and Yuo to sit down first, and then said with a serious face, so please calm down and answer my questions seriously, okay? The more detailed your description is, the greater the possibility that I can find your wife. Okay. After hearing Luo An's words, Kao and Yuo poured a glass of water and drank it. After taking a deep breath, he said with a gloomy face, Susan and I got married 2.5 months ago. The story behind it is not complicated. Kao Nuo is in his 40s and has been married before. Later, his wife died in a car accident. He raised his daughters in alone. In recent years, his daughters in has grown up and attended a boarding high school. Kao Nuo met his wife Susan, who is now just over 30 years old, by chance. Kao Nuo and Susan fell in love at first sight, and after interacting for a while, they held a wedding at the small St. Phil church next door 2.5 months ago. During this period of time after marriage, whenever his daughters left high school and return home, she would always be in a bad mood, and it was the same the night before yesterday. The father and daughter had a big quarrel, and went back to their own rooms. Yesterday morning, Jono suddenly found that the door of his house was not closed. He took a closer look, and found that his daughter was missing. So he quickly contacted the New Jersey Police Department to report the missing case. At the same time, Jono and Susan also drove around looking for Sheena. Hearing this, Luo An lowered his head and wrote it down in the notebook, then looked up and asked, did Susan also go to look for your daughter? Did you two search separately? Yes. Kao Nuo nodded and said in a deep voice, it was about 9:30 last night when I found my daughter in a small hotel. Then I called Susan, and she said she was near the Louis supermarket and would be back in half an hour, but she didn't come home until 11 o'clock in the evening, and no one answered the phone when I called her. Luo An wrote and drew on the notebook and continued to ask, did Susan drive? Yes. Kyle Nuo pointed to an old red car outside with an unsightly look. Susan had been driving this car before she married me. After she lost contact last night, I went to the supermarket to look for her. The car was parked at the corner diagonally opposite the supermarket, and the key was also inserted in it. I couldn't find her, so I drove the car back. Okay. Luo An drew a circle on the notebook, preparing to go to the supermarket to check the surveillance later. Just as he was about to get up, he suddenly blinked and asked with his head tilted, "Mr. Jono, how tall and how much does your wife weigh?" 1.66 meters, about 45 kilograms. Luo An stood up from the sofa, and Lassie also walked out of her daughter's house on the second floor. After waving goodbye to her daughter, she walked out of the apartment door with Luo An. It's just a teenage girl who was deceived by the school quarterback. Seeing Luo An tilted his head to look at her, Lassie shook her head. This matter is probably nothing to do with her. At least I didn't see that she lied to me. Luo An nodded, believing in Lassie's judgment from the intelligence department. Turning his eyes to Riyad shook his head. There are no clues near the house, and there are no signs of struggle in the car. It is obvious that the missing person Susan got out of the car on her own initiative. Okay. Without hesitation, Luo An decisively took the two back to the sub and drove to Louis' supermarket. Louis' supermarket is a small supermarket similar to an oriental convenience store, and the owner is a white old lady named Louise. Hearing Luo An's question, Louise shook her head and said that her store had no money to install surveillance cameras. As for what happened last night, just as the woman got into the car, a grey car stopped next to her. Louise said that she was old and her eyesight was not good, so she didn't see what happened last night very clearly. A white man got out of the grey car, about 40 years old, with curly hair, wearing an ordinary black coat. The man chatted with the woman in the red car for a while, and the woman got out of the car with a smile. The man opened the trunk with a smile, and before the woman could react, she was stuffed in by the man. Lassie, Ryder, Luo An, okay. With a twitch of his mouth, he recorded Louise's narration in a small notebook. As for why Louise didn't call the police, it can only be said that the people living at the bottom of American society all have a past. Roan continued to ask, did you see the license plate number of that car? Or, have you seen the man driving the car before? My eyesight is not good. How can I see the license plate number clearly? It is even more impossible to see the man's face clearly. Louise curled her lips, feeling that the dentures in her mouth were a little crooked. She stretched out her hand to straighten them and said slowly, but I did see that man when I went to Little St. Phil Church to eat. He didn't eat, but just stood half in the shadow and half in the sun, watching the new lights in the church smoking silently. Hearing this, Roan, Lassie and Ryder looked at each other. Their eyes lit up instantly, and just as they were about to ask Louise a few more questions, she suddenly took out 3 cans of drinks from the side and stuffed them into the arms of the 3 people. $3. Thank you, Roan. After paying silently, Lassie and Ryder went around to ask and check those old-fashioned cameras that were not connected to the internet, hoping to find some clues. Roan walked to the place where the red car was parked last night. Mona, where I'm standing now, is there any online surveillance? Hearing Roan's words, the sound of typing on the keyboard came from the other end of the phone, and then Mona sighed. Your area belongs to the old city, and there is no online surveillance in a large area. After telling Mona the color of the car and the time it left here, Roan continued, then you can check the main roads outside this area with surveillance videos, and record the suspicious grey cars that appeared during that time period. Okay. After hanging up the phone, Lassie and Riyad came back one after another in a short while. Most of the surveillance cameras installed by businesses are old-fashioned surveillance cameras, and they are all facing indoors. Lassie's face was not very good. There are a few surveillance cameras facing outdoors, but the surveillance area is only the front door of their own store. Riyad nodded. It's the same here. Okay. The old city areas in America are all like this. Roan didn't say much, but took Lassie and Riyad to get on the SUV again, go to Little St. Phil Church, and have a look. I have a hunch that there will be a surprise there. Thank you for the support of all book friends. Without further ado, here are 3 updates today. Chapter 70 Lake. Amid the melodious music, a young couple kissed each other in front of the priest. The relatives and friends of the couple applauded enthusiastically, and the church was filled with a happy atmosphere. In the corridor behind the church. "Excuse me, Mr. Agent." One of the church managers, an old priest with glasses and grey hair, frowned and thought for a long time after listening to Luo An's description, and shook his head and said, "I'm really sorry, but I really haven't seen the man you just mentioned. I don't have any impression of him in my mind." At this point, the old priest paused, tilted his head, and pointed at the passers-by who were eating the offerings outside the church and said, "You can ask them. Some of them often participate in the offerings. Maybe you can get useful information from them." "Okay, thank you, Father. You're welcome. May God bless you." The old priest smiled and nodded, praised Luo An, turned around and slowly left. Turning around, he saw through the glass that the newlyweds in the church were singing and dancing with their relatives and friends. Thinking of the victims who were already lying in the morgue, Luo An's mouth corners slowly turned down. "Let's get together tomorrow night. It's settled. Bye." Lassie and a young white woman dressed as a nun hugged each other and chatted for a long time. They agreed to go out and play together tomorrow, and then returned to Ronan and said calmly, "There is only one surveillance camera in the entire church, and it is in the hall where the newlyweds hold their wedding ceremony. The surveillance range is only in the hall. We can't find the white man standing in the corner outside the church that Louise mentioned through the surveillance point. Let's put the surveillance camera aside for now." After a moment of silence, Roan had a complicated expression and an even more complicated tone. "You don't let the nun go either? What are you thinking about?" Lassie glanced at Roan and wiped off the faint lipstick marks on her face. "Henna is a volunteer who came to this church to help, not a nun. She wears a nun's clothes, just to match the scene here." At this point, Lassie's mouth corners raised, her eyes shining, and she whispered to herself, "But I've never tried being a nun." Roan, I asked a few passers-by who often come here to eat food." Without waiting for Roan to speak, the fully armed Riyadh ignored the surprised looks of the others, walked up to Roan and said solemnly, "One of them is a scavenger, who said that he saw two white men yesterday morning, who took some food, and stood in the corner, eating and chatting. The appearance of one of the men is similar to the image of the man described by Louise." "Oh." Roan turned his eyes away from the scumbag, and after hearing Reed's words, his eyes lit up, and he immediately said, "Take the scavenger and Louise back to the headquarters immediately, and contact the portrait expert at the headquarters. Ask him to draw the appearance of the white man described by the scavenger and Louise to see if it is the same person." "Okay." Reed nodded, turned around and made a phone call. At this moment, Roan's Nokia suddenly rang. "What's wrong, Mona?" After answering the phone, Roan saw through the glass that several young white women dressed as nuns were cleaning the hall, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly. "Not to mention Lacey, nuns, etc." He also, "I found an important clue, Roan." Mona's voice on the other end of the phone was very solemn, and Roan's attention was immediately drawn back. 5 hours after Susan disappeared, a grey sedan drove out of a small forest area 2.7 miles northwest of Little St. Phil's Church, and there was a small lake in that forest area. "Shit." Roan immediately threw aside the messy thoughts in his mind, hurriedly pulled Lacey back to the SUV, and stepped on the accelerator to rush towards the direction of the forest area. Riyadh didn't get in the car because he wanted to take the scavenger and Louise back to the FBI New York headquarters for a simulated portrait. The black SUV was like a sharp sword, speeding through the busy streets. Lassie, who was sitting in the passenger seat, swallowed her saliva and silently fastened her seatbelt. Luo An continued to ask on the phone, "Tell me about the surveillance in detail, Mona." "Okay." Mona on the other end of the phone said without any nonsense, "The place where Susan disappeared is in the old city, and there is no online surveillance, so I followed your request and focused my attention on the main roads outside the old city, where there is complete surveillance. Susan disappeared after 9:30 p.m., around 9:35 p.m. From the place where Susan disappeared, she left the old city. I calculated the time when the cars arrived at each intersection, and the error was within 10 minutes. As a result, I found that there were too many grey cars and I couldn't check them all." Turning the steering wheel and stepping on the accelerator, the black SUV easily passed the small book in front. Hearing Mona's words, Luo An nodded. After 9 p.m. is the prelude to the opening of nightlife. It is normal to have many cars. But it suddenly occurred to me that the murderer would throw the body into the lake after killing someone. At this point, Mona on the other end of the phone smiled. The last time you were looking for the murderer of the kidnapping case, you mentioned the inertial thinking. That reminded me. I guess this murderer will also have inertial thinking and throw the body into the lake after killing someone. So I started to investigate the nearby lakes. Sure enough, 5 hours after Susan disappeared, a grey car drove out of the grove with a lake, and the scene was clearly photographed by a small house on the edge of the forest area. This small house was built by an old white man who often came to this forest area to fish. He was afraid that his fishing gear would be stolen, so he installed an internet surveillance outside the small house. After listening to Mona's narration, Luo An looked strange. Sure enough, the fisherman can catch everything except fish. By the way, the steering wheel suddenly turned, and the black SUV drew a semicircle on the ground and quickly drove into another road. Lassie's face changed slightly, and Luo An continued to ask, "Can you find out who the owner of the grey car is?" "No." Mona on the other end of the phone tapped the keyboard a few times. Her face darkened. The grey car drove sideways in the surveillance, and I can't see the license plate. And this car disappeared after leaving the forest area, and there was no trace of it on any of the main traffic roads. "Okay, thank you for your hard work, Mona." Luo An frowned slightly, but didn't say much. After hanging up the phone, he saw that there were not many cars on the road ahead, so he stepped on the accelerator again, and the speed of the SUV increased a bit. "Lassie, tap in forest area, a forest area with a small area. There is no large human community nearby, only a small community with dozens of people. So except for some dides who occasionally come to the small lake on the west side of the forest area to fish on weekends, there are occasionally some young men and women who taste the forbidden fruit and come here to seek excitement. Raven and Ken are such a young couple." Chapter 71 New Corpse. Please read. Please vote. So, don't interact casually outdoors. Seeing Ken sitting on the ground with his legs weak, but still holding tightly to the crying ribbon, Luo An was speechless. Let's not talk about mosquito bites. The Federation releases so many horror movies every year. Don't you remember the stories in them at all? Ken swallowed his saliva and said in a trembling voice, "I thought they were all stories." "The inspiration for the stories all comes from life, young man." Shaking his head, he let the two young people get into the SUV to rest, and then took out his mobile phone to call the parents of the two young people and asked them to pick them up quickly. It should be the same person, Luo An. At the edge of the lake, in a deep pit washed out by the water, a female corpse was buried in the water, lying quietly. Lassie stood at the edge of the deep pit and took a quick look. She found that the marks on the neck of the female corpse were clearly visible, and there were traces of being tied up on her wrists and ankles. Some bruises could be seen faintly on the collarbone, and the pants of the corpse were also a little crooked. The most important thing was that the ring on the corpse's hand had disappeared. Okay. Seeing Susan's body, Luo An was silent for a moment, then called Augustus and briefly described the situation here. Augustus immediately notified the trace examination department and asked them to send agents to check the scene as soon as possible. After hanging up the phone, Luo An began to observe the surroundings and saw a row of deep footprints in the dead leaves on the ground. It seems that the murderer originally planned to carry the victim and throw her into the lake. Lassie walked to Luo An, looked down at the footprints, looked up at the path some distance away, and then looked at the lake that was still a short distance away, and shrugged. But he couldn't carry the victim halfway, so he threw the victim here. No, it shouldn't be. After carefully examining the footprints on the ground, Luo An frowned, bent down and squatted. He simply measured the length of the footprints, and then said, "The length of this footprint is definitely more than 25 centimeters, and it is not clear whether it is 26 or 27. Take 25 as the lowest number, and use the formula to infer the height, based on the length of the footprint. 25 times 6.8, which is about 170, so the murderer's height is definitely taller than 170. Lassie from the intelligence department looked dazed, and before she could react, Luo An continued. Both Louise and the scavengers said that this white male was of medium build. I asked Susan about her weight before, and it was only about 45 kilograms. Under normal circumstances, an adult white male with a height of over 170 centimeters and a medium build cannot carry an adult white female with a height of 1.6 meters and more than 90 kilograms. Louise and the scavenger had never said before that they saw that the murderer had injuries. Clapping his hands and standing up, Luo An turned his head and saw the expression on Lass's face. He was stunned and then grinned. I learned it at the FBI training academy. As a killer in his previous life, erasing his own footprints and how to fake footprints to confuse trackers were required courses, such as some basic knowledge. Teenagers have short steps, thin footprints, irregular distances between footprints, and curved walking routes. Young people have long steps, large footprints, regular distances between footprints, and walk in a straight line. The elderly have short steps, walk steadily, have short footprints, and the pressure on the heel in the footprint is heavier than the sole of the foot, etc. After learning the basics, the old killer taught Luo An a lot of ways to hide his true age through steps, footprints, etc. Okay. Lassie didn't ask in detail. She came from the intelligence department and had some knowledge of this, but she was not very proficient in it, and she couldn't remember it for a while. So, what do you mean? My meaning is very simple. The murderer's original plan was to throw the body into the lake. You are right about this. Luo An pointed to the lake not far away, and then pointed to some messy footprints next to the deep pit, frowning slightly. But when he walked here, he must have encountered some kind of emergency, which forced him to throw the body into the deep pit. Hearing this, Lassie frowned. What emergency? Luo An spread his hands. I don't know either. It's just a guess. Maybe someone found the murderer's parked car. Okay. Lassie nodded, didn't say much, and began to carefully search the periphery of the scene with Luo An. In the gully between the deep pit and the lake, on a tree growing diagonally, Luo An accidentally found a small transparent packaging bag. What is this? Seeing Luo An carefully picking it up from the leaves, Lassie also came over and tilted her head to ask, it looks like a bag of flour. It's possible. Luo An nodded, carefully put it away, and continued to search outside the scene. Soon, several detectives from the trace examination department drove a car to the scene. Luo An briefly handed over the transparent packaging bag to the other party, and then two detectives from the trace examination department jumped into the deep pit and began to carefully examine the area around the body. After a while, the two frightened young lovers were also picked up by their respective parents. Seeing the intense reactions of the parents of both sides, Luo An felt that these two men and women who were looking for excitement would not be able to sleep tonight. After the on-site inspection was completed and the body was packed up and put into the car, Agent Neil from the trace examination department, who had met Luo An once because of the appearance of the female corpse in the refrigerator during the previous missing case, came over. Hello, Neil. Thank you for your hard work. Luo An extended his hand, smiled and greeted Neil, and asked with a smile, how is it? Did you find anything? It's all work. Agent Neil smiled on his round face. Hearing Luo An's question, he briefly described the situation at the scene, and then said, the victim is suspected to have been sexually assaulted by the murderer before his death, but it cannot be determined before the autopsy. The cause of death is most likely the marks on the neck. Luo An nodded. Okay, please notify me as soon as the autopsy report comes out. No problem. Neil smiled and agreed to Luo An, and the two parties returned to their respective cars and returned to the FBI New York headquarters together. The office area of the 5th investigation team. Still can't find any traces of the grey car. Luo An. Lassie went to notify and comfort the victim Susan's family, while Luo An took off his equipment and sat back on the chair at his workstation. Just as he was about to stretch, Mona stopped typing on the keyboard and came to Luo An to complain. There are too few networked surveillance cameras in that area. One hand can check them all. There are too many traffic arteries outside the area, and the traffic volume is huge. It is impossible to check the suspicious grey car. The grey car drove sideways through the surveillance of the house outside the forest area. Because of the angle, the license plate of the grey car can't be seen in the video, and there is no difference in the windshield. Naturally, it is impossible to check the other party through the traffic arteries. The only thing that can be confirmed is that the grey car has 4 tires and the doors are intact. Don't be discouraged, Mona. As long as you keep working hard, you will definitely get something. Pour a bowl of hot chicken soup on Mona's head, which made her dizzy, and Luo An pushed her back to the computer. Mona was about to say something else, but Riyadh suddenly pushed open the door of the number 5 investigation team and shouted excitedly to Luo An, "Luo An, the portrait simulation you asked me to do has come out. You will never guess who the man who appeared in the churches, asking for monthly tickets at the end of the month. I also hope that all book friends will support this book and stop supporting it so that this book has a chance to become popular. Thank you all. There will be 3 more chapters tomorrow. Chapter 72 Undercover. Please read. Please vote." Ryder's loud voice startled everyone in the number 5 investigation team. Roan frowned and asked, "The priest in the church? Or Susan's husband John?" "No. No, not them." Ryder carried 2 large drawings and walked to Roan's desk and tore them apart. Roan looked down and saw a sketch of a face that looked a little strange but familiar. "This is..." Looking at the portrait in front of him, Roan was silent for a few seconds and suddenly looked up, staring at Ryder. "Agent Mullen from the D. Yes, that's him." Ryder nodded. He didn't know Agent Mullen's name, but he knew that he was one of the agents who came to Roan that day, and he was also a D. Hearing Roan's words, the other agents who came forward also remembered that Augustus brought 2 agents to Roan that day, and their brows were frowned. Mona turned the portrait around and looked at the sketch of the person's face with a serious expression. "The D guy is a serial killer?" Thinking of the way Agent Mullen looked at him that day, Luo An admitted that he didn't feel comfortable with him. But if he said that the other party was a serial killer, Luo An always felt something was wrong subconsciously. "No, it's not him." Hearing Mona's words, Riyadh shook his head, lifted up the portrait of Agent Mullen, pulled out another portrait from the bottom, and pressed it on top of Agent Mullen's portrait, and slapped it hard. "Agent Mullen is one of the 2 people the scavenger saw. This man is the man who stuffed Susan into the car according to Louise, and the man who stood in the corner outside the church according to the scavenger." Seeing the man with deep facial features, mature looks, and a small broken mark on the right eyebrow in the second portrait, Roan frowned slightly, and before he could say anything, William on the side suddenly narrowed his pupils and cursed angrily. "Shit. Damn it. It's him." Roan tilted his head to look at William, only to see William quickly return to his workstation, typing on the keyboard with his 10 fingers. After a moment, a case report appeared on the computer screen. "Roan, when you asked Mona to investigate the criminals who lived near the Little St. Phil Church in the Circle and were imprisoned for rape, stalking, indecent assault, etc., I helped Mona check for a while and found this failed case. Because the other party was not imprisoned and the time happened a year ago, I did not record it." Roan turned his eyes to the computer screen, and William explained, "A year and a half ago, this white man named Sean was arrested by the police for rape and murder. But the New Jersey police only had the testimony of 1 witness, and Sean's DNA was not detected on the victim's body. The crime scene was also washed by rain, and no traces were left. In addition, there were witnesses who vouched for Sean and emphasized that Sean was definitely not at the crime scene when the crime occurred, so Sean was acquitted in the end." "What?" Hearing about this case, Riyadh, Mona and the detectives were very surprised. Roan touched his chin and was silent for a few seconds and asked, "If I'm not mistaken, the witness who testified for Sean is Agent Mullen?" "Yeah." William nodded. In the European and American legal systems, it is very common for police officers to testify in court during the trial, and in many cases, the testimony of police officers can become one of the important evidences in the trial. Did Agent Mullen give false testimony? After reading the case report, combined with the serial murder case currently being investigated by the number 5 investigation team, the idea of Agent Mullen's false testimony suddenly came to the minds of the agents of the number 5 investigation team. But they have no evidence. Thinking of Mullen's work from the D and his previous attempt to pull him undercover, Luo An understood something in an instant. This scene is probably an undercover under Mullen's command. Luo An clapped his hands hard to attract everyone's attention and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, we now have a suspect. It will always be much easier to reverse the clues through the suspect. Now please immediately investigate this scene's life and check his connection with the 4 victims of the serial murder case. Then, find a way to find the key evidence." At the critical moment, it was time for the technical staff of the number 5 investigation team to exert their abilities. "Okay, no problem." William and the other 5 technicians immediately agreed to what Roan said and turned to the FBI database to check Scene's life file. "Ryder." Roan turned his head, cast his eyes on Ryder, and said in a deep voice, "You go to the forensic doctor immediately and make sure to get the autopsy report as soon as possible. As long as Scene's DNA is found on Susan's body, their number 5 investigation team can immediately apply for an arrest warrant." "Okay." Ryder nodded heavily, threw the sketch on Roan's desk, and turned away again. Watching Ryder's back disappear quickly, Roan nodded and turned his eyes to Mona. Just as he was about to ask if she could quietly enter the D's information database, Mona interrupted him. "I have successfully entered the D's network, Roan." The sound of the keyboard rang, and soon, the word file download appeared on Mona's computer. Seeing the fast-moving progress bar on the computer, Roan cursed the garbage speed of a certain network disk in his previous life. At this moment, an exclamation mark suddenly appeared on Mona's computer. Luo An's eyelids twitched slightly, and Mona raised the corner of her mouth with a disdainful smile. Her fingers quickly tapped the keyboard to ensure that the speed of downloading the file remained unchanged. Time passed quickly, and at the moment when "File download completed" appeared on the computer screen, Mona suddenly stood up and unplugged the network cable behind the computer. "Luo An, this operation is really skillful." "Okay." Sitting back on the chair, Mona breathed a sigh of relief and pointed to the computer screen and said, "Here is the undercover information of Scene in the hands of the Agent Mullen." Luo An's eyes lit up when he heard it. "Thank you for your hard work, Mona." Mona stretched and waved her hand. "It's not hard. If the D people come to find us, you can take over." "Luo An, don't panic. It's time to let August show his ability." As mentioned earlier, several technicians in the number 5 investigation team are all old people who have worked in the FBI data room for a long time, and they can find information very quickly. Only a few minutes had passed, and Scene's information from birth to the present had been checked out. Scene Davis, 41 years old, social security number ****, lives in the Harwood area, and the recorded marriage was 3.5 years ago, and the wedding was held at Little St. Phil's Church. William sat on the chair and read with a serious expression. His wife Lina suddenly disappeared on the way home one night in the 3rd month of marriage. After subsequent investigation, it was found that she was kidnapped by a local gang. Roan walked to the front of the meeting room, pulled over a whiteboard, motioned his teammates to continue, and he began to write on the whiteboard. Chapter 73 Contact. Before they got married, that is, 8 years ago, when Scene was 33 years old, William pulled up the information in the computer and read carefully on the screen. Scene worked as a salesperson in a real estate company, and our 4th victim, Tamara Terry, was 22 years old at the time, and happened to be interning at this real estate company. Not only that, as soon as William finished speaking, Mona waved her pen with her right hand, pointed to the undercover log on the computer screen and said, after his wife disappeared, when Scene was looking for her everywhere, Agent Mullen found him. After observing for a while, he judged that Scene was smart, aware of the times, sentimental and eloquent, so Mullen contacted and told Scene that his wife was kidnapped by the White Horse Gang. If he wanted to save his wife, the best way was to cooperate with the D and go undercover in the White Horse Gang. Agent Mullen's judgment was correct. Half a year after Scene went undercover in the White Horse Gang, he obtained the White Horse Gang's human trafficking information and the criminal evidence of the White Horse Gang's criminal leader, and finally destroyed the entire gang in one fell swoop. Hearing Mona's words, everyone looked at him sideways. Roan, who was writing in the front of the conference room, paused and turned around to ask, "Where is Scene's wife?" "Dead." Mona's face was not very good. According to the small leader of the White Horse Gang who is responsible for transporting goods, Scene's wife was suffocated to death in the transport vehicle. Roan thought for a long time and continued to ask, did Scene eat flour when he was undercover in the gang? Yes. Mona pulled down the computer page, carefully checked the undercover log and read, according to Agent Mullen's records, Scene was forced to smoke flour in the first week of joining the White Horse gang. After the gang was destroyed, Scene was sent to a drug rehabilitation institution by Mullen. 7 months later, Scene successfully left there. Roan nodded, wrote a few words on the whiteboard, has had the experience of smoking flour and asked again, is there any record of the rape and murder case a year and a half ago in the undercover log? After Mona read it carefully, she shook her head and said, no. At this point, Mona suddenly turned around and looked at William and asked, William, what month did the rape and murder case happen? Hearing this, William tapped on the keyboard with his 10 fingers, and after a few seconds he looked up and replied, April 5th, a year and a half ago. Okay. Mona stopped playing with the pen in her right hand, pointed at the computer screen with a signature pen, and said to Roan, April 29th, a year and a half ago, Scene had a new undercover record in the undercover log under Merrin. The gang he was undercover in this time was the Hyena Gang. Roan, who was writing on the whiteboard, cursed inwardly when he heard this. Not only that, opening the contact record written by Agent Merrin with Scene when he was undercover, Mona carefully checked it for a moment, frowned and said, when Scene was undercover in the Hyena Gang, Merrin agreed with him to meet once a month at the Little St. Phil Church. At the same time, the time of each meeting between the two was the same day as the time when the first 3 victims got married. Shit. Son of a bitch. Hearing Mona's words, all the agents of the number 5 investigation team cursed out loud. After writing the last word, Roan turned around, coughed lightly to attract everyone's attention, pointed at the whiteboard with a serious expression and said, based on the information you have found, we have summarized the following clues. First, Scene lives in the Harwood area, which is right in the circle, centered on the Little St. Phil Church. Second, the place where Scene and his wife held their wedding, and the place where he met with Mullen when he was undercover in the Hyena Gang, happened to be the Little St. Phil Church. Third, Scene's wife disappeared in the 3rd month after marriage, which is consistent with the time when the previous 3 victims disappeared after marriage. At the same time, the time when Scene and Mullen met at the Little St. Phil Church is consistent with the time when the previous 3 victims got married, so Scene is likely to have learned the victim's personal information when he met with Mullen that day and kidnapped the victim 3 months later. Fourth, when the 4th victim, Tamara Terry, got married 8 years ago, Scene and her were in the same real estate company, so Scene is likely to have participated in her wedding at that time. Fifth, 1 month after the rape and murder case, Scene entered the gang undercover again, which is likely the condition for Agent Mullen to agree to make false testimony for him. After listening to Luo An's words, all the detectives nodded. The information was correct, and they had no problem with Luo An's reasoning. 1 identical line was accidental, 2 identical lines were luck, 3 identical lines were random, but 4 or 5 were all the same. Looking at the words on the whiteboard, everyone present had determined that Scene was definitely the real murderer of this serial murder case. However, Luo An and his team could not catch anyone based on these clues alone, because these were all indirect evidence. Next, it was time to look for direct evidence. Luo An walked to Mona's workstation and began to check the undercover information in Mona's computer. The autopsy report hasn't come out yet, so we don't know if there is Scene's DNA at the crime scene this time. Mona got up and left her seat. After looking at the whiteboard at the front of the office area, she tilted her head and asked, I remember there were footprints left by the murderer at the crime scene. Can these footprints lock onto Scene? William picked up the photos in the crime scene investigation report and took a look. His eyes lit up, and he started typing on the keyboard, and then he clapped his hands. Scene's credit card usage records show that he bought a pair of shoes 3 months ago. The pattern on the soles of these shoes is exactly the same as the pattern of the footprints at the crime scene. Good. Mona's eyes lit up when she heard this, and she quickly turned her gaze to Luo An. Let's apply for a search warrant now. As long as we find the pair of shoes and test the dirt on the shoes, we can prove that the other party has been to the crime scene. The grey car is also one of the important evidences, but considering that there is no record of Scene buying a grey car, and the hyena gang, where Scene is undercover, also has the business of dealing with black cars, Mona thinks that the grey car is most likely not found. No. Hearing Mona's words, Luo An, who was looking at the undercover information on the computer, shook his head slowly and said, "We need to report this matter first. There is no problem in applying for a search warrant, but Scene is an undercover agent of the D, and he is currently performing a mission in the hyena gang. It is very simple to directly arrest people or search their residence, but if the D is planning to rely on Scene to carry out certain operations in the near future, the mission will fail because of his arrest of Scene. Luo An doesn't care about the D group, but the subsequent wrangling issues will definitely require the superior to step in, so this matter must be told to Augustus first." At the same time, the FBI's organized crime division is also keeping an eye on the hyena gang together with the D. Luo An can ignore the D, but he cannot ignore the organized crime division of the FBI. So, the murderer this time is an undercover? After listening to Luo An's narration, Augustus rubbed his temples, was silent for a moment, and said in confusion, "An undercover agent's daily life is already stressful enough. Why does he have to find time to kill people?" August has never done undercover work, but one of his former colleagues did it for a period of time. Later, his colleague came back alive and stayed with the psychiatrist for a whole year. Augustus knew that this kind of work was definitely not suitable for him. Maybe it's because of the stressful life and he's nervous every day, but he can't show it on his face or in his words. Sitting opposite Augustus, Luo An took a sip of coffee after hearing this and expressed his guess. The first time Scene went undercover, it was for his wife, so he had mental support. But then his wife died, and he became addicted to drugs while undercover. This nightmare experience made Scene, who was originally just a real estate salesman, absolutely not want to go through this kind of thing again. In the rape and murder case in the alley, Scene asked Marin for help, and the other party agreed to help Scene make false evidence, but the condition was that Scene would go undercover again. So this time Scene went undercover to avoid going to jail, and he didn't have any mental support. Thinking of the D people, sometimes in order to complete the task, not only will they not take care of the undercover's emotions, but sometimes they will force the other party to do some tasks. Augustus couldn't help but curl his lips. Luo An nodded. "I just looked at Agent Mullen's records. The morning of the day when the 4 missing persons lost contact was the morning when Agent Mullen met with Scene. So it should be that when the two sides met in the morning, Agent Mullen said something that made Scene unhappy. Coupled with the excessive psychological pressure, in order to vent, Scene finally chose to kidnap a woman who he remembered and got married in the Little St. Phil Church 3 months ago." Without hesitation, Augustus took out his mobile phone. After listening to Luo An's conjecture, "I will contact the organized crime division now." Chapter 74 Bomb. "Please give me a monthly ticket. Please read on. We don't know Scene's undercover identity." Dylan, a team leader of the Organized Crime Investigation Division on the other end of the phone, heard Augustus's inquiry and immediately asked his men to look up the information of the hyena gang's characters, and then replied, "We have shown here that Scene is one of the important confidants of the hyena gang leader. The D people have never told us that he is an undercover." Dylan didn't care about this. Their team also had undercovers in the hyena gang, and they didn't tell the D about the identities of these undercovers. According to the rules, only the people in the department who are specifically responsible for him know about the existence of undercovers. Before carrying out specific operations later, they will inform the Joint Operations Department of the undercover's identity to prevent the undercover from being killed by mistake. Hearing Augustus mention Scene's undercover identity, Dylan was a little confused and asked with a smile, "How did you know Scene's identity? Did you hack into the D's internal network?" Augustus glared at Luo An, who sat obediently in the chair with an innocent look on his face. "Of course not." Augustus insisted that it was not true, and asked in a serious tone, "This Scene is related to a vicious criminal case we are investigating. He is most likely the murderer of the case." Dylan on the other end of the phone understood what Augustus meant. This was a greeting before the action, and he wanted to ask whether the action against Scene would interfere with them. So, Augustus, don't search scene's residence today to prevent disturbing the hyena gang. Seeing his subordinate, Agent Norton, knock on the door and walk into the office to hand over the documents, Dylan's pupils shrank slightly, and he immediately said to Augustus in a deep voice, "Our organized crime investigation department and the D will jointly launch a major operation against the hyena gang tomorrow. Your investigation team can send people to wait outside tomorrow. After the operation is completed, scene can be handed over to you for interrogation." Whether the D people would agree to this matter was selectively ignored by Dylan and Augustus. Okay. Augustus nodded, smiled, and agreed, and also made an appointment with Dylan to go drinking together after get off work. After hanging up the phone, Augustus told Luo An about the joint operation with other departments tomorrow. Luo An frowned slightly, remained silent for a few seconds, and did not say much. He nodded and turned to leave the team leader's office. After telling the news to the detectives of the number 5 investigation team, many people relaxed. The serial murder case has been completed more than halfway, and all that is left is to prepare the key evidence and wait to take over scene tomorrow. Luo An sat back at his workstation with a serious look on his face. Because they don't have direct evidence in their hands now, Luo An asked Augustus to report this matter just now, mainly to tell those who monitor the hyena gang that he is going to search Scene's house and find the key evidence that Scene went to the edge of the lake last night. But now things have developed into arresting Scene tomorrow and searching Scene's house later. Mona, who was standing next to him, also thought of this. She frowned and looked at Roan, asking in a low voice, "The longer the time is, the higher the possibility that Scene will get rid of the shoes, and the lower the success rate of our conviction of Scene later. Don't panic." Roan comforted him in a steady voice. "The autopsy report has not come out yet, and Scene's DNA may be found there. And tomorrow, after the hyena gang is dealt with by the D and organized crime, we will have a high probability of finding the grey car that Scene drove that night." Okay. Seeing that Roan seemed confident, Mona also calmed down. Then Ryder brought back bad news. "Sorry, Roan." Ryder pushed open the door of the number 5 investigation team, walked to Roan's workstation with a gloomy face, and said in a deep voice, "The forensic autopsy report has not come out yet, but I asked them, and they did not find any white genetic material in the victim's body, but only some dimethyl silicone oil. In addition to dirt, there is no substance related to any murderer in the victim's nails. Dimethyl silicone oil is the main component of the outer layer of oil on some condoms. Where are the fingerprints?" Mona frowned and looked at Riyadh. "No fingerprints either." Riyadh shook his head. The trace examination department carefully checked the victim's clothes. Except for some substances in the trunk of the car, no fingerprints or hair of the murderer were found. Skin debris and other things may have been found in the blisters in the deep pit where the body was found. Shit. Hearing Riyadh's words, Mona cursed inwardly, then turned to look at Luo An. Luo An touched his chin and thought for a moment, then suddenly remembered something, and looked up and asked, "Where is the transparent packaging bag I handed over to the trace examination department? What is that?" Riyadh was confused. He was not at the scene of the crime at the time, and didn't know what Luo An was talking about. Seeing the expression on Riyadh's face, Luo An also thought of this, so he hurriedly asked Riyadh to return to the trace examination department and let them check the transparent packaging bag. Ryder nodded and turned away again. Moan looked a little anxious, while Roan waved his hand calmly. "Don't panic. There will always be a way to solve the problem." "What are you talking about?" Mona was confused. The Native American could not understand Roan's random translation of English. "It's not important." Without explaining, Roan stood up, clapped his hands to attract the attention of the detectives, and briefly explained what Ryder had just said. He said with a serious expression, "Everyone, this is the situation now. We must find more evidence to prove that Scene went to the crime scene last night. Now please take action and find everything Scene has done in the past month, and try to find more useful clues, and finally come up with key evidence to nail Scene." "Okay, no problem." William and the other 5 technicians agreed loudly, and the sound of keyboards began to ring in the office area of the 5th investigation team. Mona also sat at her workstation, her fingers flying, and checked the surveillance video again last night. "There's something strange, Roan." A few minutes later, William called Roan over and pointed to the data on the computer screen and said, according to Scene's credit card spending records, he bought 10 old wrapper 2003 phones in a mobile phone store a week ago. Huh. Roan was stunned when he heard this. He looked down and saw William calling up the 2003 rapid phone. His pupils suddenly shrank and he cursed. Fouquet. Scene wants to make a remote-controlled bomb. What did you say? Bomb? What bomb? Hearing the word bomb, everyone in the number 5 investigation team paused and looked up instantly. The building collapsed 4 years ago, and they haven't forgotten it yet. Seeing the picture on the computer, Mona suddenly remembered something and covered her mouth and said in shock, last year, a synagogue in the suburbs of New York exploded. The murderer used a rapid 2003 phone. That's right. Roan nodded. In his previous life, the old killer saw this news on the news and remembered to teach him how to make a remote-controlled bomb. The battery of this phone does not have a good temperature sensor, nor does it have a failsafe. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, Luo An motioned William to enlarge the phone model on the computer screen and then pointed at it and explained to everyone, simply modify it, and later, as long as someone calls this phone for more than 13 seconds, it will immediately detonate the phone. Of course, the explosion of a single phone is not very powerful, but as long as you connect some grenades or other explosives around the phone and then make a call at a critical moment. Shit. Jesus. After listening to Luo An's explanation, everyone in the number 5 investigation team saw that Scene had bought 10 mobile phones, and their faces suddenly changed. Thanks to Tinkt, to 2, Shadow Wings, Mian, Chanka Kakaka, Meteor Flying Knife, 1,989,250, Zioao Foxlord, Demon Neighbor, Cat in the Corner of the Alley, Felix Gayoden, Feng Yang Gaiu, Skykesage Jej, X 16,341,313 and other book friends for their recommendation. Votes. Thank you all for your support. It's the end of the month. I'm asking for a monthly ticket. Thank you all. Chapter 75 thanks. Please read. Please vote. But why did Scene make a bomb? After listening to Roan's description, Mona asked in confusion, isn't he an undercover agent? Who knows? Roan shook his head, turned to look at Mona, and asked with a serious expression, I remember that Agent Mullen's undercover record for this month did not write about this. Mona ran back to her seat, carefully checked the files in the computer, and then nodded, yeah. Hearing the affirmative answer, Roan did not hesitate, and immediately walked into the team leader's office. What's wrong? Augustus, who was writing a document with his head down, looked at Roan who entered his office without knocking, with a puzzled look on his face. But after listening to Roan's speculation, Augustus's face suddenly became serious. Are you sure that Scene bought those mobile phones to make bombs? No, I'm not sure. Roan's words made Augustus' face full of black lines, but then Roan continued, but this kind of thing is better to believe it is true than to believe it is false. I remember you just told me that the FBI's Organized Crime Investigation Division will launch an operation against the Hyena Gang with the D tomorrow. If their source of information is Scene, then the loss of the Organized Crime Division will be very huge. Augustus nodded. Dylan from the Organized Crime Division was also in the Columbus Foundation. He stopped talking nonsense and immediately took out his phone to call Dylan. Is there such a thing? After listening to Augustus' description, Dylan, who was sitting in the conference room and discussing tomorrow's action plan with the team members, felt as if his butt was on fire and he couldn't sit still. After a few seconds of silence, Dylan signaled Augustus to hang up the phone for a few minutes and then pressed another number and called the person in charge of the D's tomorrow's operation. In the office of the head of the number 5 investigation team, Roan and Augustus looked at each other in silence for a moment and then picked up their coffers. After a long time, Augustus' phone rang again. Thank you very much, Augustus. Dylan on the other end of the phone had obviously just had an argument with someone, and his tone was still a little unclear. This joint operation was not planned by the D, based on the information sent by Scene, but they also didn't know about Scene's purchase of a mobile phone. After briefly describing the general situation of the matter, Dylan's tone was very serious. August, I owe you a favor this time. If Augustus hadn't told him this news, when the FBI launched a joint operation with the D tomorrow, it would be caught off guard, and who knows how many agents would die, and Dylan's career would be over afterwards. Just treat me to a drink later. Hearing the voice on the other end of the phone, Augustus laughed, then looked at Roan, and said with a smile, but this time the news was discovered by my subordinate, the agent named Roan Greenwood. He is one of us. I will bring him with me when we drink together in the future. Don't be angry. Is it Roan Greenwood who killed a serial killer with a pen a few days ago and was in the New York Daily News? Hearing Augustus' words, Dylan's eyes lit up and he waved his hand to indicate that drinking was a small matter. Then he said that his investigation team was a little short of people recently and wondered if Roan could be sent to help them for a few days. I'll contact you later. Augustus laughed, ignored Dylan's words, and hung up the phone immediately. Old drunkard. Hearing the busy tone on the phone, Dylan grinned, walked out of his office, and shouted to his agents, "Thanks to that unreliable D, we are now replanning tomorrow's action plan." "Okay, sir." In the distance, in an office of the New York branch of the D, the leader of a certain action team, Melton, grabbed the documents on the table and threw them at Agent Mullen. "Fuck you, Mullen." Melton's eyes were full of anger, and he pointed at Mullen and cursed. "What on earth did those undercovers under your command do?" What made Melton angry was not the possibility that Mullen's undercovers might betray. In the D, the number of undercovers who died, betrayed, and disappeared every year is not small, and Melton has long been accustomed to it. What really made Melton angry was that this matter was not told to him by his own men, nor by other colleagues in the D. Instead, it was the FBI who called him to ask if this matter really happened. Their FBI agents are more valuable. They cannot be like the D, where agents can die casually due to information errors and bring shame to other departments. "Sorry, sir." Seeing the anger on Melton's face, he knew the other party's temper very well and did not make any more excuses, but explained in a deep voice, "I will do a psychological evaluation on my undercover later." "Fuck the psychological evaluation." Hearing this, Melton glared at Mullen again. According to common sense, if a person wants to join the FBI, CIA, NSA and other departments as a new employee, he needs to undergo a series of work such as background investigation, professional assessment, lie detection, psychological evaluation, etc. As long as one of them is not qualified, he will not be hired. But the D is different. Even if you are bankrupt, financially in trouble, your family background is not qualified, you fail the lie detection, and even have connections with gang members, you can become a new D employee. The reason is simple. Such people are generally sent abroad by the D, such as those countries in the south of the Federation as undercover. A person with a clean background and no black material can't break into the circles of flower sales in those countries in the south of the Federation. In this case, when the D selects undercover agents in the country, they will not pay much attention to the above mentioned examinations. The so-called psychological evaluation is mostly the D agent standing with the undercover, smoking a cigarette and chatting. Taking a deep breath, Melton sat back in his chair, staring at Mullen and asked, "Have you told your undercover about tomorrow's operation?" "No, but..." Hearing this, Mullen immediately shook his head and opened his mouth to say something, but finally denied it. "Scene didn't know about this." "Good." Melton breathed a sigh of relief, and while arranging the documents on the table, he said in a serious voice, "Reformulate tomorrow's action plan, and add the uncertainty factor that the Hyena gang may have remote-controlled bombs. Our D agents cannot die from information errors." "Okay, sir." Mullen nodded and turned to leave the office. After closing the office door, Merrin's face darkened immediately, and he gritted his teeth and whispered to himself, "Damn scene, and the FBI guys. Well done, Roan." After hanging up the phone, Augustus grinned. "It's not just my credit, sir." Roan shook his head and said seriously, "William discovered that Scene bought a mobile phone, and Mona investigated the file. I just judged that the other party had the possibility of making a bomb." "Good." Hearing Roan's words, Augustus's smile became even wider. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.